Hello and good evening. Tonight's gentle journey takes us to surviving medieval winter nights, sleeping in wooden huts. Lower the volume, rest your eyes, and let the past be your lullaby. If this brings you peace, consider liking and subscribing only if it truly helps. And share in the comments where you're joining us from and the hour there. Now, lights down, a soft fan if you have one, and let's begin our walk through history. Begin with the breath. Watch it feather into the dim, thin white, vanishing. You lie under a quilt pieced from the afterlives of clothes father's worn tunic, grandmother's linen, a ragged strip of fur. Above, roof beams glitter with frost, a cheap constellation on timber. The embers mutter, red light smears the rafters. Your skin keeps score cheeks stung raw, toes bargaining with numbness, shoulders curling to hold heat. You did not wake to an alarm. You woke because the cold had opinions. The hut is a lesson in holding on. Walls are split logs daubed with clay and chaff, seams thumbed shut where wind once found its way. The thatch is last summer's straw, now bowed beneath a cap of snow. The floor is earth tamped hard, clothed in straw to keep bone off ground. The air carries yesterday's smoke that never quite leaves, damp wool, the sharp sour breath of ale by the hearth. A draft tests the board and peg door, and then slips back into the weather. You share a bed that is not a bed, a lake of straw and a scatter of hides. Mother's back is a steady wall of warmth. A younger sibling's feet are cold stones tucked behind your knees. In houses where money buys frames and mattresses, curtains trap heat. Here the curtain is flesh, shoulder to shoulder, breath to breath. The family builds a microclimate that works because physics does not ask for permission. Your father eases from the pallet, careful not to spill the little lake of warmth, sure-footed in the dark. The fire, banked under ash, still breathes. He worries it awake with a stick ahiss, a flit of sparks, the smallest lamp cupped in coals. Light walks over faces, mother's profile, your sister's wild hair, the frost above. For a heartbeat, the room is a chapel to embers. Picture the plan, one room, everything in it. Not failure, but engineering. All life crowds the reliable machine of the house, the hearth. Black rafters confess long years of smoke. The floor keeps boot marks. A daub seam is darker where last week's melt found a gap, and your mother sealed it with her fist and a prayer. People far away argue whether winter rooms were truly as cold as breath suggests. Some say careful tending kept air tolerable. Others claim fogging your own breath was routine. You are not an index entry. You are a body. Your body says the cold is here, and its vote is the only one counted before dawn. A mouse rattles a pot, a chicken shifts, smoke creeps, but it also drives out pests and turns rafters into a drying rack for meat and their skins. The price is eyes that water and a cough that lingers. In finer houses, there are chimneys. In most like this, a louvre or roof hole claims the worst of the haze. The rest belongs to you, and you carry it in hair and cloth. You remember winter's little magics. A smear of tallow so the cold splits a skin less eagerly. A square of linen over ears to blunt the bite. A pinch of dried mint or juniper strewn with floor rushes, not to cure the smell, but to let the house pretend it is summer for half an hour. These do not beat weather. They keep courage from thinning. Your father speaks a language the coals understand. Breathe. Wait, breathe again. A veil of ash to keep the new heart from spending itself too fast. Fuel is arithmetic. How many sticks remain? Which neighbor has a hedge worth asking about if a storm's return? Autumn's labor becomes winter's calendar. A day of gathering becomes hours of warmth now. Outside, the dark is only thinner. Snow muffles the rooster's call into something like a bird under a blanket. Wind prowls the seams and thinks better of it. The thatch shivers and shakes a glitter of ice from its edges. A few grains kiss your cheek. You startle, then smile. It is the season christening its own. A fear behind thin walls. What if the fire fails? The tinderbox waits, charred cloth, flint, steel tools that can betray when air is wet and fingers clumsy with cold. A morning is spent courting a spark costs twice labor, and heat is squandered while it waits. Better to nurse a bead of red beneath ash and treat it as a living thing but tucked to sleep. The hut speaks in textures. Scratch of wool at your wrist, a cool island where a linen patch holds, the prickle where the palate has thinned, the thick seam where two histories meet in the quilt. Nothing here is pretty for its own sake, but everything is eloquent in use. Each surface says, hold on a little longer. Wind presses a palm to the door and shoves cold through the cracks like a thief's fingers. The board rattles. Your father listens not for wolves, not yet, but for the mood of the storm. Satisfied it is testing rather than taking, he banks the coals into a small, patient mountain and slides back under the cover. The quilt lifts, heat eddies, and settles again, the way a pond smooths after a tossed stone. Map the room by sound, your sister's thin whistle, your mother's tied true breath, the pig's punctuation from its corner, the embers whisper, this chorus is proof. Silence would be worse. Silence would mean the coals went black and the lungs around you fell quiet. Noise is the low hum of survival. If wisdom lived in one sentence scratched on the door, it would be this: the house is not an object. It is an act. Build, bank, share, wait. A one-room plan is the simplest machine for keeping warmth where lives are. Chimneys come late and dear. Smoke holes and patience come first. Every choice here says to winter, not today. The frost above is a lesson. It maps where the cold nests and where your heat fails to climb. Sailors have their constellations. You have these Orion of the beam, Cassiopeia of the smoke hole, guides only for the quiet pride of endurance. The embers pulse. Red briefly wipes their silver map, and you breathe easier. The stars will return, so will you. Stay inside this hush a little longer. Morning is not a rooster or a clock. It is the breath your father lets out when the flame answers. Morning is knowing you have one more ember than fear. When light comes, there will be bread to think of, wood, and whether the snow has worked into the thatch. For now the night has loosened its grip, and that is enough. The warmth you keep isn't a hearth trick alone, it's arithmetic done in flesh. Shoulder against shoulder, knee to calf, breath to breath. The family makes a weather of its own under a patchwork weight. There is no space here for the modern luxury of borders. Bodies are the walls within the walls. An inner palisade that answers drafts with pulse and heat. The palate is wide because life has been poured across it. Parents, children, maybe a hired hand in a hard year. Sometimes a grandparent whose joints complain when frost walks the floor. Everyone learns the choreography of the heap without thinking. The smallest faces face inward. Older arms build the ring. A vigilant edge is left to the ones who wake first at the hint of a gust. It is not affection first, it is physics. Push your palm under the quilt and feel how the air changes where bodies gather, the subtle bloom of warmth where three breaths meet, the quick loss of heat where a corner gapes and the night slips a knife between cloth and the skin. You shift an inch and the claw of cold tests your ribs. You shift back and the cold is argued down by a brother's shin pressed to your thigh and your mother's spine warming your chest. It is ungainly and exact. A blanket alone has edges, a family has none. Heat leaks from fabric, it is hoarded by the living. In the dark, the shapes assort themselves as they always do. Your father lies along the outer line, long legs stretched as if to dam the seam where the door talks back to the house. His arm is a bar against a draft. His shoulder is a hinge. The blanket tugs around in the hollow between your mother's elbows. A baby sleeps in perfect indifference to the rest of existence, and the whole cluster answers to that calm with a gentler range of motion. Your sister sleeps curled like a hedgehog, hair a thicket laid across your forearm. A younger brother's feet are a pair of stones you tuck with your calves until they soften from ice to almost warm. Comfort would be too generous a word. The straw works through cloth to prick your ankle just where the seam has thinned. Someone's elbow forgets it belongs to them and borrows a home between your ribs. The quilt's patched fur bites the skin of your neck. Wool itches. Breath smells of last night's ale and smoke. You sleep in everyone's story. Privacy here is a concept like summer peaches lovely and in this season impossible, but pride has no way to argue with winter. So you share what you can share: warmth, the same air, the stubbornness to outlast dawn. In finer rooms far from the spinning snow, a bed can be a small fortress. 4 posts lift a wooden frame, ropes woven into a firm net, a mattress fat with wool or feathers, curtains cinched to keep in breath and heat, a tester above to catch the drafts that creep from a stone. Servants might pull a truckle out from underneath and sleep low to the ground, young limbs against cold boards, but the master lies in a fabric cocoon, the world narrowed to his own weather. Here in the hut, your bedstead is a floor, your curtain is family, and your canopy is the underside of a patched quilt. What lords weave with cloth, peasants accomplish with bodies, and yet the engineering is the same at heart. Make a pocket where heat stays. Everything else is custom and cost. Those curtains in wealthy rooms were not ornament first, they were insulation, a way to borrow a climate out of a winter night. Your heap on the straw answers with the only fabric you can afford in quantity: a skin. You draw loops of warmth around the small bodies until the arc is closed. In the morning, when you sit up and cold spills into the hollow your weight once warmed, you can see the shape of that pocket in the esteem of your breath and the faint oval of melted frost on the quilt. People argue, even now and far away, whether houseful sleeping made families closer or simply made every small irritation ring louder. Your own ribs hold the answer tonight, and it is both. There's a tenderness that happens only at distances this short. Your mother's hand finds the baby by memory and not sight, and in finding him, steadies everyone else. Your father's cough unlocks a chain of small movements. Your sister rolls. You turn. The quilt redistributes so that no one feels the cold alone. Then, 10 minutes later, your cousin's foot begins its pilgrimage toward the only warm spot left for it, your shin. You revise your theology of kinship swiftly and without piety. Love returns, but not before you nudge all around you. The proof that sleep in such a house is a civic act. Someone turns and whispers sorry into cloth without waking. Someone else pushes a strip of blanket toward a person on the edge because the draft there is meaner than argument. Even dreams are communal. Your brother fights a wolf with twitching heels. You, half dreaming, kick the same enemy without waking. Fears move across a pile the way heat does by proximity. The bedding gives as much as it takes. When the straw was fresh, it rustled like a summer field inside the hut. Now it is flattened and work-worn, but still it holds you a thumb higher than the earth that exhales frost. Beneath, your mother laid a skin where the worst damp crawls thin fur turned up to meet cold toes. Stitched into the quilt are old scraps of hope, a square cut from a shirt that saw 2 harvests, a strip of brown dyed with walnut hulls, the last sound patch of a cloak otherwise surrendered to winter labor. You can map your family's years with your fingers. Here is the seam she ran last Candlemas. Here is the repair he made in autumn when his sight in bad light shortened and the stitches fattened. Lice, fleas, and mites take their tithe for the heat you keep. It is a tax you cannot pay with coin, only with a skin and a resigned scratch in the half-sleep hours. Your neck prickles. Your sister scrapes at her calf. Someone mutters in annoyance. No one moves far enough to break the weather of the heap. In a better season, fresh rushes and herbs will sweeten the palate. In this one, you endure and call it by a proud name, staying alive. There is safety stitched into the lay of bodies, and it is drawn as plainly as a plan. Children toward the middle, thin cheeks turned toward thick cloth, older bones toward the edges, where vigilance and drafts both find them first. A hand half awake and always counting, even if the counting is more sense than thought. 102, 3, 4. All the breaths I am responsible for, all of them here. If a door bar shifts in its socket, if wind finds a new gap, the outermost shoulder feels it, and the pattern ripples inward until someone rises. Alone. The sound might have been a question. Together, it becomes the signal for what to do next. Sleep itself acquires manners when so many share it. Loud snorers lie turned toward the hearth. The cousin who kicks is banished toward the goat close enough to be warm, far enough not to bruise. You lie as compact as nesting spoons until a leg needs a stretching, and then 4 bodies stretch together like a murmuration in reverse. In the rare, honest quiet between coughs and sighs, you can hear the palate breathe, a straw settling to accommodate some new demand, a low, grassy acceptance. No one teaches you these protocols. You learn them the way a hand learns a tool's weight. Sometimes a visitor slips into this room, a neighbor shivering from a failed fire, a widow trading a tale for a night behind a door that locks. The heap widens without discussion. You feel the blanket lift, the air drag cold across your ankle, the slight ache as bodies reshuffle. Resentment and generosity wrestle under the same quilt, and heat, which obeys simpler rules than the heart, climbs anyway. The house gets warmer by inconvenience. The lesson repeats itself until even a child understands it. together is warmer than comfortable. There are the stories of beds elsewhere with feather mattresses so deep a child could drown in them, hung in painted cloth carved with saints. People say their owners dream sweeter. It may be so, but you know a different kindness that comes without artistry. At the moment, your younger brother flails in sleep toward the edge of the pallet. 3 hands, including yours, find him blind and tug him back toward the human fire. No carved saint has warmer fingers. He subsides. The breath of the heap slows again to a low, patient tide. On nights when frost is worse and wood tightens its belt a notch, the family will press closer, and the quilt will climb a little higher over ears, and even words will shrink to save heat. Don't speak unless you must, someone mutters, not unkindly. The hush is not as strict, it is thrifty. Every saved breath is another minute before the embers need feeding, another inch before cold reclaims the air you paid so much to warm. You might remember, years from now in a softer bed, the feel of a sibling's heel lodged firmly against your shins, and laugh. You might remember the sour sweet smell of wool and smoke, and some gentler room will seem empty in comparison. You might forget the itch and remember only how the quilt exhaled when 5 bodies exhaled under it, and think that was the sound of us being a house. But for now, you simply turn a fraction toward the center, pledge your back to the edge, and surrender to the weather your family has made. The truth is simple and not sentimental. If you slept alone, the cold would make its argument with your bones until you conceded. Because you do not sleep alone, the argument is carried and buried under breath and blanket. That is the whole invention here. No hinge, no pulley, just the calculus of people. Enough bodies, enough heat, enough stubbornness to ride the night to its pale edge. You settle into the sum, fit your arm where it offends least, and let the human warmth you help make return the favor, until the dark loosens and the ember's eye brightens and the heap rises, all at once, to begin the next arithmetic of day. You do not undress for sleep. You dress for it layer by layer as if the night were a weather that must be crossed. The cold is a season with rules, and the first is this: keep linen nearest the skin. Keep wool where the world can touch it. So you lie beneath the quilt, still swaddled in your day's shirt of linen, soft where years have broken it in, and over that a woolen tunic that has learned your shape. Your legs are bound in hose that itch just enough to remind you they are working, and at your feet a handful of cloth wrappings stand in for socks, tightened by habit until they look like the bandages of a small saint. Wool scratches, yes, but it also forgives, it remembers heat, and it keeps making it even when damp sneaks in. The tunic's nap has been raised by time and by rough washing against boards. It is thicker now than when it was sewn, as if the garment has decided to grow up into winter with you. The linen beneath it is a quieter ally. It drinks the sweat the wool refuses, spreads it thin, lets it vanish into air. Someone once told you that linen is a summer's friend. You have learned it is winter's understory, the pale layer that keeps skin from learning the word raw too well. Your mother taught the lesson without book's linen next to skin, because it can bear the pot, the boiling, the beating on a washboard when rivers run, because it dries cleaner than wool can dream of. Wool outside because it makes a small house around you, a felt of protection that even a stray flake of a snow cannot insult for long. You have seen her pull a garment back to warmth by accident and by design soap and elbow grease, working the fibers into a denser wall. The coat that returned from that labor came back smaller but newly serious, like a child after its first winter. Color survives where it can. Your sister's sleeve remembers a stew of onion skins that lent it a faint harvest yellow. The better patches on your mother's overdress keep a brown made from walnuts, mellowed by years of smoke into something like earth. There is no vanity in it, only the stubborn will to let the eye find a kindness in the room. Tonight, under the quilt, you can pick out the square that was once your own dyed kerchief. Now a patch near your shoulder, the seam is crooked. The love inside it is straight. It is a strange thing to fall asleep already dressed, but a strangeness surrenders quickly to custom. You know the quiet ceremony, loosen belt, never remove, keep knife near, never under, tug the hood or cap until it cups the ears, cross arms to pin cloth where the draft would argue. The nightcap is not a joke here. A coif, a scarf, a scrap of wool pulled low, it matters. Heat runs to high ground, so you wall the high ground and keep it. A bare head is an open window. You shut yours with the string and habit. Hands find their winter intelligence. Before lying down, you stuff a little straw into the sleeve at the wrist where wind licks first, and a little more into the gap between tunic and hose, a rustling hedge against the dark. The sound makes your sister laugh. The warmth makes her mimic you. Well-worn mitts become pillows for chilled fingers. A fringe of fur stitched at the collar keeps the worst teeth off the neck. None of it is handsome. All of it is effective. You look like a bundle of repairs, and you sleep like someone who knows repairs are the difference between pain and pride. If you were to strip for bed, you would begin shivering before a single prayer could be finished. The room is not an enemy so much as a judge who expects you to meet it halfway. You keep on what you worked in. You add what the evening earned you: an extra shawl for the eldest, a better hood for the one with the cough, a second pair of foot cloths for whoever drew the edge side of the pallet. The fabric might be damp from yesterday's thaw. It might smell of smoke so strongly that your dreams taste of it. You choose the itch that warms over the comfort that kills. Some nights, when the wind has remembered a date it wishes to collect, you know the ritual will square itself one layer further. A cloak becomes blanket, becomes roof. Your father will lay his old field cloak over the baby, and the baby will sleep inside the scent of earth and sheep as if it were a private season. Your mother will pull a scarf across her cheeks against the bite of air that finds every gap, and when she speaks, it will be through wool, and the sound will be a softer but not weaker. You will slide your hands inside your tunic like a thief and borrow heat from your own ribs. What you wear to bed is also what you wear to morning. Laundry is a river sport, and the river is a glass set hard by cold. Soap exists, and you have watched it scold your knuckles raw and clean in better months. But winter is an honest miser. Cloth dries so slowly the damp can put a chill into bone. So garments hold the stories of days and nights together. They are smoked and sweated into. They are aired when the sun permits it. They are mended, and when they cannot be mended, they are cut down to clothe someone smaller and warmer. You sleep inside this ledger of use and care. The smell of the bundle is a chronicle. Smoke sits in the wool like a permanent guest. Sweat writes a smaller stanza in the linen and then fades. Damp tries a line or two along the hems before the fire edits it away. Once, in the late autumn, your mother tucked lavender between the folded clothes. A ghost of it still returns when you lift the quilt too fast. It is not enough to conquer the other ascents, only enough to remind you that summer has not ended everywhere at once. You have learned to sleep with weight on you, not only the quilt's patchwork gravity, but the moral heft of what the garments represent. Your grandmother's hands set these seams. Your mother's hands replaced those cuffs. Your father's shoulders learned this tunic so thoroughly that when you put it on, you borrow his endurance along with his smell of pine and the sweat. You pull your hood down over your brow, and it is a benediction hand. You sleep, wrapped not simply in cloth, but in proof. Movement wakes the house, so you keep still when you can, but the stillness cannot be perfect in a bundle, and the cloth finds ways to complain. A seam bites. A hem climbs your calf to ask for attention. The laces at your hose's knee loosen the exact moment you have almost fallen asleep and require a muttered negotiation under the quilt. In that wakeful seam between first and second sleep, you fix it. Fingers numb, patience older than you are, while the banked colds watch like little eyes. Then the bundle makes sense again. There are colder ideas in the world than the hood as pillow. Yours, doubled, is the right height to lift the ache out of your neck. The cap catches the little whispers of heat that crawl out of your hair. Some nights you wake with a strapline printed across your cheek like a small river. You smile into the dark at the map your own clothing made of you. Other nights, the hood slides and leaves a triangle of bare nape the draft knows to aim for. Then the quilt is pulled up one finger higher, and the arithmetic of warmth begins again. If a stranger were to step in and ask why you wear tomorrow to bed today, you would answer by breathing on your own knuckles and showing him the white. You would lift the edge of the quilt and introduce him to the night the way one introduces a dog that is loyal only to those who have earned it. You would tell him that nakedness is for bathing and for birth and for having been rescued from a river, not for lying still while the wooden house teaches you humility. He would understand, or he would leave. Once, in a barn at harvest, you slept with no linen, only wool and the skin and a straw. You woke with your shirt sticking to you and the welt of a stalk tattooed along your belly. You have never forgotten how quickly a lack of layer can turn a night into punishment. You have also not forgotten the rare summer evening when the heat insisted you shed the tunic and lie in your shift alone. And even then a shawl sat near your head, because trust is not a season here. Trust lives on hooks with the cloaks and drops into your hands when the wind says its name. Your father stirs, the quilt lifts, the weather changes, and your piled garments notice at once. The cold maps every seam. Then he settles, and the map fades. You breathe. The little ache in your ankle where a straw has made a point of itself sinks back into the blur of warmth. The hood's edge finds your ear again, and you hear less room and more heart. The night, dressed as you are, lets you pass. You will dream in these clothes. You will carry their weight across whatever snow your mind makes for you. You will not wake confused because your sleeping self knows the buckle at your waist, the wool at your throat, the linen at your wrists. When dawn rinses the rafters gray and your father coaxes the coals into a thin orange blade, you will stand up already halfway to morning patched, smoky, wrinkled, warm where it counts. You will shake crumbs of a straw from your hem, snug a strap, smooth a sleeve, and step from bed into day without surrendering a single degree of heat to the enemy you have just outlasted. For now, though, the quilt sinks, the bundle holds, and your body relearns the old lesson. Sleep is not the absence of armor, but another kind of wearing it. You let the clothes keep watch where you cannot. You turn your face into a scratch of wool and the softness of linen at the same time. And inside that small layered fort, you give up your name to warmth, the way a coal gives up its glow to ash, knowing it is not an ending, only a way of lasting until the next touch of flame. You stir in the straw because another kind of warmth has shifted a low, contented grunt near the hearth, a feather ruffle on the rafters, the soft chime of a tether ring against a post. You have grown so used to them, you forget they are not furniture. Animals breathe in the same dark you do, and their breath makes little clouds that join yours. A faint menagerie of a stem in ember light. In winter, the hut keeps what lives. Sometimes that means goats as neighbors and a pig asleep like a brick with a heartbeat. The pig is the nearest a stove a poor house can afford. It tucks itself into a nest of hay by the warmest stones, skin glossy with heat, grunting now and then as if telling the fire to keep its manners. Slide your feet forward and they find a small sun along its flank. Your toes a sigh in their cloth wrappings. You do not wake it, you borrow from it. The pig knows the bargain and asks little but the scraps it is owed by day. Some nights it takes your blanket's edge for its own with a snuffling confidence that would be rude in a person and is charming in a beast that radiates comfort like a furnace. A goat drowses a little farther off, a rope looped to a stake, so it will not investigate the corner where food is kept. It chews in its sleep. The slow jaw and the sour sweet smell of its coat feel like another piece of the house talking, this one in a grassy accent. When the draft sneaks in beneath the door, your ankle drifts toward the goat's warmth too. It shifts, tolerant, and keeps dreaming of hay. Above, hens crowd a beam, heads tucked, occasionally shivering themselves back into alignment. Every so often one wakes and utters a soft syllable that means nothing but also everything I am here. This mingling of breath and heat, of feathers and fur and people is not oddness. It is arithmetic again. One room holds what heat exists. Bodies are currency. In smaller buyer dwellings, folk and beasts share a roof by plan, separated by rails or wattled partitions that knock down wind and hold in warmth. In single-chamber cottages, necessity is less tidy. A hurdle leans to make a makeshift stall. The pig earns the hearth corner because it protests until it is granted it. Calves and kids come in out of weather that would shrink a young life down to nothing. You do not invite a cow, you invite the calf. You do not invite a flock, you invite their fragile part. It is not clean. You knew that before a sermon or a scribe told you it might not be. Smell is the price of not freezing. Smoke and damp wool and the pen near the hearth together, they make the perfume of survival. The floor was sealed with clay and dung to harden it. There will be stray proofs of life in the straw that your mother will sweep toward the door come morning. Winter forgives what summer scolds. You wrinkle your nose once, then forget it again because your fingers have stopped aching and your breath no longer comes with a sting. Even the sounds of the hut are different with animals inside. Men snore, pigs hum, children murmur, hens talk to their dreams. The goat's hoof scrapes, and for a second your body thinks it is a hand at the door. You listen and then remember hooves do not turn latches. Still, the animals keep watch in their way. A goose, if you're lucky enough to have one, is a night watchman with wings. It will hiss at shadows that even a dog might consider beneath notice. A dog, if you're luckier still, will do the talking you're grateful not to do. It is said wolves think twice when a yard answers with noise enough to say we are many awake. You think of stories told low on other nights, a child who slept with her feet always pressed to the pig, so stubborn about it that her sister has swapped places to barter for the same right. A night when the hens, unsettled, returned to their roost 3 times, and the 4th time a fox shadowed the eaves. A mother who brought a kid in to save it from frost and watched it nibble a corner of the quilt until the patchwork was less history and more lace. These are small wrongs in the column of right. The animals give heat and alarm and companionship, and the fleas that find their way from coat to cuff to collar are attacks the winter collects because it can. There are houses, you are told, where animals sleep elsewhere. Barns are separate, big as ships, and the smell and sound of beasts belong to another building entirely. There are houses where floors are polished boards and a smoke obeys a chimney instead of bargaining with a hole in the roof. You can picture such rooms by candlelight, quiet as a church after Mass, and your mind wants to step into them for a moment, out of this shared, loud nest. But when the wind finds the seam in a rich wall, it still looks for a seam. And when wolves talk through the trees, a thick door may be proud, but a pig is persuasive. You do not envy so much as measure. Your father used to joke, soft-voiced, so as not to wake anything with teeth or worry, that the animals are saints without the patience to sit for an icon. They stand between your bones and the cold hour after hour and ask for nothing you would not give them anyway. He told you once, as he set a hurdle to fence the pig away from spilling coals, that the house is more likely to catch fire than to be visited by a demon, but that both visitations are repelled better by a bucket of water than by charm. Still, there's a charm tucked into the hurdle's twine and iron pin with a twist your grandmother swore turned harm aside. The pig pays it no mind, your mother does. Health is a quiet balancing act here. Smoke stings, but it also keeps biting things at bay. Warm air carries coughs more than cold, perhaps, but cold makes lungs cruel anyway. You have seen winters steal breath from elders who do not sleep within the heat of the heap, and the summers bring back the color that a smoke took from their cheeks. The goat's warmth might bring a flea. The goat's milk might put a strength where hunger would otherwise write its name. You count a mites with your fingernails and count blessings with your tongue, and call the count even if it isn't, because even is how you sleep. Listen, the animal chorus is a lullaby by accident. The pig's low metronome. the goat's dreaming chew, the feather drum of a hen readjusting her balance in the rafters, even the small scuffle where mice hold parliament near the grain sack has become part of the score. You will chase them with traps in the morning and curse their intelligence. But in this hour, their noise is only one more voice that insists the house is full of life. If a silence falls so thorough you cannot hear fur or feather or your father's cough, then you sit up. Noise is proof. You have learned to love it. On some nights of sharper weather, you carry the kid closer to the hearth and fold your cloak half around it, and it breathes the same fast little rhythm as the baby. Your mother laughs without sound and says, "There is no faster road to spring than two small things sleeping side by side. In the morning, there will be work you do not want sweeping, mending the hurdle where the pig tested a theory, scraping a smear from a plank, retying a tether the goat argued loose. For now, you practice the older work lying still so the heat you all make does not leak into the indifferent night." You could talk to yourself about trouble's fleas in your collar, dung in your straw, the hen who found a way to decorate your sleeping cap from the rafters. You could, but there was a pig at your ankles, a goat near your knees, a string of hens above your head, and both your parents within arm's length, and the fire, banked, has been persuaded to breathe small and long when fear knocks, and it does. Even for those who have charmed every doorframe in the village, the animals answer first. The dog's bark becomes intention. The goose's hiss becomes wall. The pig's grunt lifts to a warning. Even the hens raise their heads like flares. You have more sentinels than you had the wood to carve. Somewhere there is a rule written on the inside of winter: share heat, share watch, share noise, share the good air your bodies make. A richer roof may not need to follow it, but you do, and you do not feel smaller for it. You feel held up by a barnyard turned inside out, by the simple truth that living things stacked together under a roof that leaks only in familiar ways are warmer in some than in pride. You tuck your toes once more against the pig's flank and it does not wake. It knows your name by weight and doesn't mind it. The ember light drops, rises, rests. A hen makes a sound like a question and then answers it by going quiet again. The goat dreams. The pig's side rises and falls against your feet like a tide. You close your eyes to that tide and let it carry you toward the part of the night where wakefulness thins. When the wind pushes on the door, you do not turn your head. You already trust the house to reply in bodies first, in boards second. You sleep not alone, not as a family only, but as a household that counts beasts as part of itself. Warmth is what they give. Warmth is what you borrow. Warmth is what you share back without words. The fire is the house's red heart and its least polite guest. It gives what you crave and demands what you cannot easily spare. It warms your marrow and smokes your eyes until tears cut clean tracks through winter grit. In a hut like this, there is no chimney as you would draw one in a child's crayon house, no tall brick throat to sip the haze away. The smoke finds its own grammar up first, to stain the rafters the color of old iron, sideways next, to break around beams and thatch, then down again, a slow river that fits itself to faces and learns your names. If you are lucky, there is a Louvre in the roof, a grudging mouth that exhales when wind allows, If you are less lucky, there's only a hole that argues with the weather. Either way, the room keeps the smoke the way a coat keeps rain. Most of it slides off. Enough remains to change you. You cough when you forget not to breathe too quickly. Your father does not forget. He moves as if the air were shallow water and he a swimmer who knows to take what he needs in tidy sips. With a stick, he lays bare the small globe banked under ash and asks it an old question. The ember answers thin orange, growing into a pupil of flame, and light runs along the underside of smoke like a knife along a fish's belly, splitting it so faces appear and then sink again. For a few breaths, you can see everyone, all the sleepers you love becoming saints in rust-red glass. Then the flame draws its cloak and the hut returns to embers, which is safer. The rafters are black, yes, but the black is not only ugliness. Soot makes a bitterness that insects dislike. It seasons the wood against tiny teeth and rot, and it dries what the roof admits of damp. Above the bed of flame, a hook and chain swing iron tempered by years of use, so a pot can find the heat without courting the sparks. If there is a griddle, it sits on 3 legs like a patient a spider, ready for oat cakes when morning agrees to be morning. Stringed near the smoke's warm ceiling, loops of meat and a coil of cheese doze in their slow cure, trading a month of haze for a winter of taste. The house keeps its hunger there, in plain sight, like prayer flags turned into food. Every fuel writes a different sentence on the air. Dry oak is a schoolmaster, steady and serious, a long lesson in even heat. Green wood sulks, hisses, and makes wet ghosts that sting the lungs. Resinous pine grins and spits a stray spark toward the quilt before your father's palm finds it and ends the joke. Brushwood is a rumor, quick heat, quicker gone. Peat smolders low and foreign-scented, a sour richness that hangs closer to the floor but keeps the room's bones warm longer than you expect. Dung cakes, shaped and dried when the year was generous enough to give you the time. Burn with a flat insistence that makes noses wrinkle and fingers stop smarting. Near the coast, driftwood lays a salt film on iron and betrays its ocean with a lingering tang. The nose keeps account. The body says thank you in the only currency winter honors. Wood is numbers. A pile is not a pile. It is a calendar with bark. The stack you made in autumn is a row of small promises you spend with care this one when the baby's cough sharpens. That one when the storm decides to test the door bar. 2 tonight because the goat is shivering too hard to ignore. Your father knows the rights that let him take brush from the manor woods. The old word for it sits in his mouth like a pebble, and he knows where to pretend he didn't see a fallen limb, because seeing it would oblige him to ask. Every stick is a conversation with someone you owe, alive or not. The room's air remembers yesterday. Smoke turns shirts into armor against lice and weevils. It refuses to be washed from wool except by the long persuasion of a spring. The rafters sweat tar like old pines. You have run a fingertip there and come away black. And under the black, something like sweetness, lives a memory of resin that was once a tree thinking of the sky. In that same skin of soot live a winter's worth of stories, ash finger crosses your grandmother traced on the hearthstone, thumbprints where someone steadied a beam in a gale, the dark halo over the hook where bacon hung as it learned endurance. The fire does not care about your romance, it wants room and food, so the house keeps tools by the hearth with the urgency of a ship's deck, an iron poker, a small shovel, a pail that sleeps with its mouth open in case flame tries to leap into the thatch. A bundle of green switches waits to be a broom for sparks. More than one family near yours has run barefoot into snow, with quilts round shoulders, while the roof laughed in fire. Such knowledge lives in the corner of every eye, and is the reason children are told a rule: without reasons, never play with a brand. The story that follows is always short and ends with a flattened patch of earth no one sows for years. Still, the hearth is not a tyrant only. It is the house's clock when heaven keeps its face turned away. The first small flame is morning at last. A low bed of coals is midnight made visible. The long, even red of a loaded fire is the gilded hour when soup breathes, and people sing before sleep makes them quiet. In summer, you take the pot outside when you can and cook by the light in the yard to save the lungs. But in winter, you live where the heat lives, and that means this circle of floor, ash soft, black rimmed, yes, but kind to bare feet when the frost below a straw would argue with bone. Some swear the smoke is a ward as well as a wage. Children are told, because children deserve something, to believe that is not sharp, that bad things that travel on the night dislike stinging eyes and the smell of oak turned into shadow. Your father does not waste the language of fear on demons. He keeps his for weather and debt. But even he, practical as he is, will sometimes fold his fingers once above the coals, as if to bless a friend who has carried him. You have seen your mother trace a little sign in the gray dust after banking the embers, and whether that charm saves breath or simply steadies it, the difference is a scholar's question and not yours. When the fire is wrong, the body knows before the mind names it. There is a heaviness that crawls behind the brow, a patience of nausea, a feeling that the air is a stew made by an impatient cook. Your father cants the door with a wedge when this mood comes over the room and lets the night comb the smoke with its long, cold fingers. The fresh air is a thief and a doctor. You shiver and then swallow easier. Not every cure is gentle. Not every kindness is warm. Your own clothes are married to the hearth. The wool your grandmother fulled has been reheated so often it has learned how to be fur. When you stand too near with damp hems after a day of shoveling, the esteem rises like the spirits you were told about, and the room suddenly smells of wet earth and sheep overlaid on the permanent note of char. Boots. If you are lucky enough to call them boots, sit open-mouthed toward the coals like beggars who have been invited inside and cannot believe the terms of their fortune. A wooden spoon left carelessly near the edge of the iron will. Remember that error for the rest of its useful life, its lip black and glossed where it tasted flame. Fear is not out of place here. It is instruction. The thatch can catch, and if it catches, it runs faster than you can climb. The smoke can settle mean and choke what it was hired to help. A spark can write a letter you will spend a month erasing. But reverence is also honest. Without this red animal caged in the ring of stones, the goat would not stop shivering. The pig would not hum in its sleep. The broth would not brag any comfort at all. Linen would never dry, and second sleep would be a myth told to make children brave. Your father's face in ember light is a map of this knowledge, respect, calculation, gratitude, economy. Some nights, the flame throws shadows on the daub that do more talking than the room's living voices. A boy with a long nose appears and then walks into a bird. A saint with a crooked halo bends to bless a pot. A wolf turns into a hand and then a roof and then nothing. You know better than to believe in any of these except as the fire's a small theater. But the part of your mind that keeps the door bar in its imagination also keeps a seat for the show. It is easier to be brave when fears agree to take shape. You learn the heart's manners with your body. Don't breathe too deep when the smoke first lies down from the Louvre. Slide a brand under the pot rather than over it. Let the ash be a blanket when you must leave the flame to its own good sense. Keep fuel off the floor so damp doesn't steal it. Save the resinous sticks for when you want quick courage, and the solid splits for the hour you want long mercy. Understand that a banked ember is not a small thing. It is a promise wrapped in powder, waiting for breath. Tonight, the promise holds. Your father feeds the smallest log he can justify to the glowwood is wage, and winter is long and lays the poker down like a quiet instrument. The animals draw closer by inches they do not measure. The room's breath evens. Your eyes sting and then stop stinging. In your mouth, the taste of char turns from insult to background. You lie back into the straw and feel the heat you did not make seep into your spine. A letter from the heart of the house addressed to your bones. Above you, the rafters glitter again where frost has crept back to edge the soot. Stars arguing politely with night. The danger has not left. It is only resting. But danger is not the only companion, and not the loudest one in this hour. Warmth is speaking, and so is the unobtrusive pride that comes from having kept a delicate animal alive with ash, care, and breath. Each ember is a small, beating thing that says the same word again and again until you finally believe it. Stay. You close your eyes to that command, and the room obeys with you. The house is a nose before it is a room. Waken, it greets you whole, not with a single smell, but with a choir smoke first, because smoke sits in the rafters like a permanent resident, then damp wool, then a straw gone from sweet to sour, then the faint yeasty breath of ale near the hearth, then animals clean and not clean threaded through the weave. It is not a stench to you, not at first. It is weather, and weather has to be read before it is judged. Beneath you the floor is earth made stubborn. Last year and the year before, your mother smoothed it with clay, chaff, and dung until it cured to something like a hard brown skin. In places where a snow seeped at the door, the skin has blistered and gone soft again, a dark damp that the fire tries all night to pull upward and vanquish. Step barefoot there, and the cold licks your heel with a long tongue. Step on the drier patch by the hearth, and the earth remembers warmth. The house teaches your feet a map better than your eyes could hear. Mercy, there, endurance. Straw does its best to stand between your skin and the ground's breath. When it was new, it smelled like summer field and sun and the clean whisper of cut stalks. Now it smells like everything it has learned. It has swallowed ash and the spilled porridge, and the esteem of wet cloaks hung to dry. There are sour notes where a jug bled a mouthful and nobody noticed until morning. There's the mineral tang where snow thawed into a shallow and then evaporated back into the house, leaving its ghost behind. You nose your blanket up and the scents climb with you. A scroll no one wrote, but everyone can read. The walls add their own paragraph, split logs, mudded where the wind insists on being clever wattled, and daub patched until your mother's knuckles remember the texture better than your face remembers names. In high summer, those walls smell green, a clean earth that hints at the straw and dung that bind them, like the breath of a field after rain. In winter, the same walls smell trapped, as if the cold has thickened everything, as if the smoke has written the same sentence across the timber so many times it will take a spring a month to erase it. Touch the daub and it leaves a dust on your palm that feels like a secret. You do not tackle the smells with soap first. You argue them with herbs. Even now, in a season that has locked the ground, your mother keeps a pouch with the last of summer's leaves. When the air turns too sour to ignore and tempers sit prickly at the edges, she crumbles a pinch of mint, perhaps a little sage, into her palm and casts it over the floor rushes as if sowing a tiny field. Juniper, if she is lucky enough to have a sprig dried and saved, snaps like frost beneath her fingers and releases a clean, sharp promise that cuts through smoke for a time. The house brightens. Mice reconsider their appetites. Fleas file grievances and leap elsewhere. It is not medicine in the way a priest would recognize. It is mercy. Rushes themselves, humble blades you hauled from water meadows, when the sun had not forgotten its job, once lay thicker across this floor. In better months, you change them more often. Now you make do, plucking the worst, tucking in what sweetening herbs you can spare. Churches do the same in grander style, strewing their stone aisles with green and letting sanctity wear the perfume of country lanes. You have knelt in such air and felt your own hut's scent explain to you, we are all fields brought inside, and winter is merely a season where the field complains louder. Ale has its corner by the hearth, and it talks to the room whether or not you invite it to. A small keg exhales a sour, sweet breath that softens cold from the inside when there is a swallow to spare. The scent of it sits on the tongue of the hut, even when cups stay quiet. In a house that eats the same bread every day for weeks, even the ale's aroma is variety. Like a story told a new way, it stands cheerful against the heavy notes of a smoke and a straw, insisting that grain still agrees to be generous in at least one form. You become a sorter without trying. Your nose edits. First you notice the thick blanket of a smoke eye's sting. Throat rasps. Then, after a few breaths, the smoke moves from foreground to frame. Then you notice the wool's animal edge. Your own clothes turned into a second skin with opinions. Then, only when someone shifts, or the pig sighs, or a hen shuffles its feet, the beast notes rise, push the blanket higher, and another layer of narrative arrives, a sweat in the linen. Honest and unashamed, after a minute, all of it merges into a single thing named home. Children make games of the catalog. Who brought the pig into the quilt last? Whose boots are telling their own tale by the door? Is that onion skin dye we smell, or onion from the stew she promised would not burn and then pretended didn't? Laughter is another herb scattered in the straw. It freshens what cannot otherwise be freshened. Your sister protests a blanket that has learned too much. Your mother says warmth is the only sweetness that matters in this century and tucks it around her anyway. The truth is not negotiable. Warmth trumps perfume. Step outside and the argument reverses. The air is a blade and a blessing, so sharp it cuts the smoke from your clothes in one breath. So cold your lungs scold you for daring. It smells of nothing and everything a snow, bark, an iron cleanliness you nearly worship until your fingers remember they are made of water. You stand in it for the count of 10, anointed. Then flee back into smell that is not only smell, but shelter. Fresh air is a dream. It is also a thief. Inside, the heavy reek is loyalty with the temperature. What does this air make of your sleep? It climbs your dreams and repaints them. Smoke becomes a mountain. You climb whose slope shifts beneath your feet. The sour tang of ale turns into a festival that hovers just out of reach. The stable scent of hay makes a meadow so high with summer you're lost in it and do not care. In fever, odors are sermons, the goat's musk, a forest of antlers and eyes. The scorch on the pot, a warning that fire does not keep friends without scolding them. When you wake and the dream breaks into scent again, you know where you are by your nose before your eyes agree. People who argue in books will go on arguing. Did this air rot lungs or preserve them? Did smoke harden bodies against illness or invite it to sit? Your own chest is the court that hears the case every night. On bad evenings, when the wind pushes a smoke down until it lies across the floor like a tired animal, your head aches and your stomach goes patient and you welcome the cold slice from the wedged door. On good evenings, the smoke climbs where it is asked and polishes the rafters, scolding fleas into retreat and licking damp away from a wall that might otherwise weep. The verdict changes with the weather. There's another truth tangled in the scents everything you own takes on the house as a second flavor. Your cloak smells like smoke more faithfully than it smells like you. Your hair obeys the house before it obeys the field. Even the quilt, patched with lives and winters, keeps last year's hearth in its seams. When the spring finally insists on itself and you air everything on chords in a wind that knows its business, the hut will sigh, lighter by a smell you noticed only when it left. In daylight, you sweep the floor toward the door with a broom of bound twigs, pushing out yesterday's ash flakes, today's straw ends, the tiny disasters of a house that is also a barn. Sometimes your mother crumbles a pinch of salt where the threshold stubbornly remembers damp. Not because salt can cure a house, though some will say it keeps mischief from stepping in, but because salt is the lesson of thrift turned into ritual scatter little. Change what you can. Let the rest be answered by fire and patience. The scent lifts for an hour. That is plenty in a season measured in minutes of relief. At night, the smells weigh more, as if darkness were another ingredient. Your father banks the fire and the smoke shifts lower. The pig breathes louder, the goat's coat warms and sweetens. The quilt exhales the day it collected sweat and wool and the mineral ghost of thawed snow. You draw the edge up to your nose and inhale not because it is pleasant, but because it is proof. It says, bodies were here, work was here, bread and wood and a straw and breath were here, and nothing outside the walls can argue that away for the next few hours. You have heard fine noses complain in market towns, gagging at scents they called barbarous tanners' yards, fish at ebb tide. A room like this one when too many people have lived honestly in it through hard weather. Their words pass you like smoke going the other way. A hut that smells of its own survival is a room that has done its work. It has kept warmth and life together under a roof that could have failed and did not. So you do what generations did when noses could not change their world. You soften the hard notes with handfuls of memory. Sage under the palate, mint in the rushes, juniper near the door, a sprig of something that still remembers the sun tucked into a quilt's seam where your face will find it without looking. You let those little green ghosts speak their quick lines and then fade into the larger chorus. It is enough. The embers blink. A thin draft pulls a ribbon of smoke toward the roof, and the room's great smell shifts from crowded to companionable. Your sister sighs into the wool at your shoulder. Somewhere the ale whispers to itself. The animals adjust their notes. You lie back and let the air be what it is, dense, imperfect, loyal, and in accepting it, you feel the cold that lives on the other side of the door give up a small battle. Sleep comes carrying the hut's perfume like a cloak. You tuck your nose into it and let the night thread you back into the fabric you have been part of all along. Your father kneels as if before a small altar, and the house holds its breath. He has done this so many nights that the floor knows where his knees will land. The coals glow like a handful of small, stubborn hearts. He cups the ash with his fingers, slow, careful, as if he's covering a baby's face from a draft, and lets it sift in a gray veil over the living red. The sound is a soft rain. The coals dim, then bloom again under their blanket, pulsing through powder the way a sleeping chest rises beneath a quilt. This is not putting the fire out. This is tucking it to bed. No one wastes a log at this hour unless the wind has found new teeth. Wood is numbers and winter is a long equation. Banking embers is how you save tomorrow from stealing today. Without this ritual, morning would begin with the long misery of convincing wet tinder to accept a spark while frost gnaws ears and patience. Matches do not exist. Your household owns a tinderbox, a sliver of steel, a shard of flint, a scrap of charred linen that catches a sparks like gossip catches ears. Sometimes there is amadou, brown felt shaved from a fungus your father prizes like coin, dried and coaxed with saltpeter when luck and trade allowed. Even so, a spark born to a cold, damp dawn can sulk like a stubborn child. Better to bury the fire now and wake it later by name. You remember the first time the glow hypnotized you? You were small, and the embers looked alive. A family of tiny beasts breathing slowly in the dark. You reached with a stick to make them do a trick. Your father's hand found your wrist before the ash rose. Too much air kills more fires than rain, he whispered. And you learned that night that fire is not fed by excitement, but by restraint. Since then, you have watched his choreography rake the ash wide, so it is not a suffocating lid, never a mound that smolders meanly across the room. Leave a line of red like a secret smile so the morning knows where to begin. Lay the smallest splint nearby as if setting out bread for a guest that will wake hungry. There are beliefs that live around this act like cats around warm stone. If the coals die while the house sleeps, some say misfortune has learned your path. A grandmother's voice once braided a rhyme into the ash. Only breath and habit, maybe, but habit that outlived the hands that made it. She traced a cross on the hearthstone with 2 fingers gone black and murmured words you could never catch. Your mother still does it some nights, half prayer, half muscle memory, and whether it shields the house or only steadies the one who cares for it is a question for scholars and saints. In this room, comfort counts as proof. There is practical law mixed with the old whispers. In some towns, a bell rings that says, "Cover your fire curfew." Cover few, the hour when flame must be made into ember out of respect for roof and neighbor. A banked hearth does not throw sparks that wander into thatch. A house that forgets to tame its own heart is a bad neighbor, and villages remember bad neighbors in songs that do not flatter. Your father, who keeps few opinions about superstition, keeps many about roofs and songs. If the banking is wrong, the room tells you by morning, pack the ash too tight and you wake to a dead, cold belly of gray that gives back nothing, an urn of yesterday. Be stingy with ash and the fire lives too loudly, chewing fuel you cannot spare and seasoning your dreams with alarms about thatch. The art is the air enough to breathe, not enough to feast. The ash is not a grave, it is a coat. You feel the difference in your sleep without knowing how you know. On good nights, the hearth has a heartbeat. You can hear if you lie quietly enough. A slow hush-hush under the breath of the house. Sometimes neighbors borrow fire the way they borrow flour. A lidded pot, heavy with coals, travels under cloak from door to door. A boy runs careful-footed through snow as if carrying a sleeping bird. There is pride in lending and gratitude in receiving, and a rule spoken without speaking: if you wake too cold a stone, you go first to the widow's house and then to the family with sickness, and only then to the friend with poor luck and good jokes. A living ember is cheaper than wood and kinder than argument. There were winters when people said a bride took a coal from her mother's hearth to start her own continuity cupped in both hands. Old fire making a new name warm. You have never seen it, only heard it told when hands were busy and eyes had nothing to do. But the idea makes more sense to the heart than most stories that pretend to sense. You cannot fold warmth into a bundle and carry it through a field. An ember will do. Your father favors breath over bellows, a hollow reed once when he had one, now only his careful lungs. He kneels so his mouth is level with the ember's bank and gives the smallest air, a coaxing more than a command. In the dark, he looks like a man telling a secret to the floor. When he is sick, the task passes to your mother, who is less patient but no less faithful, and to you, when hands become too few, your cheeks learn the distance between too much and just enough as precisely as your feet have learned the warm parts of the floor. There are dangers, and knowing them is not the same as fearing them. A room too tight with a smoke can turn breath into a chore. A bank too thick can fume like a sulking coal pit. Those are the nights the door is wedged a thumb's width, and the cold is invited to comb the air with icy fingers. The draft steals heat and leaves clarity. Everyone shivers and then sleeps easier. Prudence is a draft you choose before the wind chooses for you. Ash has its own book of uses. In the morning, your mother will save what's clean and mix a pinch with fat to scour a pot. A winter's lie when soap is dear. A stitch of ash dust rubbed into a wool seam tightens moth's appetite. A handful sprinkled along a threshold keeps a wet patch honest. That utility makes the nightly banking feel less like a chore and more like setting tomorrow on its feet. Heat saved, soap started, pests discouraged, luck courted. A gray handful becomes a ledger. Once in a while, the fire fails you. There is no philosophy for those mornings, only work. Flint and the steel pinch stars into the dark. The char cloth catches one and blushes. Your fingers, clumsy with cold, offer it to a nest of a straw and shaved sliver like a mother introducing an infant to a generous aunt. You breathe, and the spark thinks about becoming flame, and for a malicious minute you believe it will choose not to. When it finally decides to live, the relief is large enough to be shameful. You hide it by being busy stick, then twig, then something that calls itself wood, and the whole hut breathes as if it had been holding itself taut. Children learn the rules before they understand the reasons. No poking the hearth without an elder is a law with teeth. The scar on your cousin's wrist is its rubric. Never walk with a brand is a commandment as rigid as Sunday. Yet there is gentleness tied up in the string of rules. Your father will show you the trick of finding red under gray with 2 fingers and no fuss. Your mother will let you sift a pinch of ash over a boastful coal so you feel the hush of it settling. Small mastery grows trust. This ritual says more than warmth. It declares the day done. When the ash falls and the ember dims to its patient eye, tools go to their corners, the talking thins, the last cups make their round. Even the animals answer the signal by finding the posture that will let them keep heat without work. Banking is the room's goodnight, not an ending. A pause that admits morning as a thing that will certainly happen if tended. You still worry. What if a gust slips the bar and shovels the ash aside? What if the goat, dream startled, kicks a coal free? What if the ash caves into itself and smothers what it meant to save? Worry is a kind of parent that never sleeps. But winters teach a better habit than worry, trust measured in work. You trust your father's hands because you watched them for years. You trust your own because you learned. You trust the ember because thousands of nights have taught it how to live under a little weight. If fear rises, you lay your palm on the floor and feel for warmth 2 arm lengths from the hearthstone. You find it, and that is the answer you needed. Ash settles with a tiny sigh you can hear only when the room is as quiet as a thought. The ember's glow withdraws into itself and becomes a fox in a burrow, present, hidden, ready. Your father sits back on his heels and rubs the black from his fingers with a pinch of the thing that made them black. He looks for a heartbeat, like a priest closing a book. He's not pious about it, but he gives the hearth a human word anyway. Stay, he says, as he always does. The coal obliges, under quilts and cloaks, bodies loosen. Your breath finds the slow of second sleep. The hut darkens to the color of rest. Somewhere beneath the ash, a red thread keeps running. It holds the house to itself the way a stitch holds 2 old pieces of cloth together. Gifts in this century are rarely sudden. Most are made of patience. An ember that sleeps and wakes when called is one of them. You close your eyes into that promise and let it carry you. A small boat tied to a warm pier through the colder water between now and morning. You wake without being called, not by fear, not by hunger, simply by a hinge in the night that turns of its own accord. The room has learned this rhythm, and so have you. First sleep, the watch, second sleep. No bell answers from a church, you're too far from a stone and choir, but the coal's small red eye and the weight of the quilt tell the hour as plainly as any clock. This is the middle tide, when minds lift to the surface and bodies do not argue about it. No one announces the watch. It arrives like a thought. Your father's breath changes. Your mother's hand finds the baby, checks warmth by memory more than motion. Someone coughs in a neighbor's hut, a sound you feel as a crease in the wind, and the dog 2 houses over pushes a nose against a door to taste the air. In richer places, a candle would be dared to life. Here the ember's blush is light enough. It paints a short lane across the floor, and you walk it with your eyes until the gray of ash and the red of coal decide to share their small company. The middle hour is good for little work, the kind that has to be done and the kind that likes to be done secretly. A torn cuff you could not see in daylight becomes suddenly obedient to fingertip and habit. 3 neat stitches in the quiver of ember light are a victory worth keeping to yourself. Your mother rises only enough to knead the dough she mixed at dusk. The warmth near the hearth will coax it toward life by dawn. A wooden ladle is set where it can dry without warping. A wetted cloth is wrung less angrily than it would be when morning bosses the room. Sometimes there is prayer, a few lines, no more, the kind that keep hands busy and thoughts from fraying. Saints of hearth and throat and shelter are invited as quiet as breath. You have seen your mother's lips move with "keep the frost away, keep the fire awake," a charm that is half blessing and half good sense. Your father is less liturgical. He presses his palm to the banked ash once, feels the heat lift into his skin, and calls that act a psalm. Not every task is pious or patient. In villages where roads are honest mud and ponds, remember summer, people walk in the watch to borrow fire or to share a rumor before it cools. Neighbors step into one another's dark with cloaks put on hastily and faces sheepish with the pleasure of company. A swallow of warm ale goes round again, thinner than before but kinder, and narrow talk wood left, roofs that help, pigs that refuse to be sensible, fills the hour with a domestic courage. Children do not wake for it. They will learn the hour later when their limbs grow into the right kind of restlessness. The watch is also for listening. Wind shapes its own grammar at night. If it scrapes, snow is crusting. If it moans low, the thatch is burdened but holding. If it whistles under the door bar, a wedge will tame it. The goat makes a soft scolding sound, and your ankles answer by tugging the quilt a thumb's breadth farther down toward feet. A hen ticks twice on the beam, and your sister, who was born to understand chickens, hums once in reply without waking. In a world where walls are thin, you learn to talk back without words. You settle into the same old argument with the cold and win it by staying. Your eyes slip again to the embers. They have grown darker while you were counting your mother's breaths. So you do the small thing you were taught. A little breath to fatten the glow, a pinch of ash to quiet its ambition, a sliver of a stick laid near, not on tomorrow's promise set out like bread. The coal answers with a brighter pulse, and the room returns to its level heartbeat. This is not labor so much as tending the hinge on which the night swings. Between sleeps, the mind behaves differently, and people know it without needing the right words. Dreams walk closer to waking, thoughts polish themselves like as spoons thumbed by habit. You have had ideas in this hour that would not come at noon: how to stop the draft at the sill with nothing but an old apron and 2 pegs, where to set the hurdle so the pig stops harassing the goat, who should stand at what edge of the pallet so the littlest one sleeps warm. Once, in a season when wood felt rarer than good news, your father reckoned the stag by memory in the dark and woke a certain of a neighbor he could ask without debt hanging sharp between you later. The watch makes accountants of everyone. There is laughter here too, muffled under the quilt to keep the habit of silence, but no less real. Your sister admits she dreamed of a pantry impossible in scale bread that regrew the slice you cut, a pot that refilled itself like an argument. Your mother snorts so softly you feel it rather than hear it. Small jokes are safer than big hopes at this hour. They keep the watch from turning into a tally of worries. People who write say the body likes this, 2 sleeps with a door between, and they have found their proofs in old sermons and doctors' advice. You do not need their Latin to believe it. Your bones themselves keep the calendar a heavy first dreaming, a wakeful middle, a second sleep that is less crowded with interruptions. In summer, when the dark shortens and the day pushes at your back, the hinge vanishes into labor and dreams reduce to a thin ribbon. In winter, the watch returns like a guest with his own spoon. Sometimes the watch is for fear, not the large fear, the storybook kind with teeth at the edge of the forest and men with iron beyond the hedge, but the respectable fear about roofs and coughs, and whether the bread will stretch to the line you imagine in the calendar. You lie there and count breaths that are not yours, your father's, your mother's, your brother's, the goats, even the pigs. If the night has gone very quiet, counting does not fix anything, and still it helps. Numbers are a kind of faith, so many lungs still doing what they should, so many reasons to sleep again. And yet, because this is a house, not a parable, there are nights when the watch is for love, not the courtly sort with songs and a window and frost on a lute, but the kind that resettles itself quietly under a quilt, with a hand found gently rather than grabbed, with breath kept soft out of respect for a child's sleep at your back. The watch has always belonged to that, and to the whisper talk that follows, a kind of planning that is closer to prayer than to plot. Tomorrow's kindling, next week's barter, whose turn for the edge, who is coughing more and who will say they are fine because they hate being told not to be proud. When illness sits in the house like an uninvited uncle, the watch lengthens. Someone rises to heat a stone and wrap it in cloth for a belly that complains. Someone leaks a rim of onion and vinegar into the air, believing it lures sickness from the chest. Someone hums without melody to borrow steadiness from the sound itself. In those nights, the hinge creaks loudly, and no one pretends otherwise. Still, a second sleep usually comes because the body is old and stubborn and insists on it. There are practical orders as well: children to the center again if the draft has grown toothed. The Louvre nudged with the pole so it will remember to behave, a cloak unrolled from its peg to make a new shore on the side where the quilt pulled short. You have seen your father rise 3 times in an hour not at the fire's bidding, but because his mind could not sign off on the same worry twice in a row. The last time he lay down, you tucked the quilt around his shoulders, and he pretended the sleep had caught him instantly. The pretense is kindness. You let it stand. Every village keeps a parable of the watch. A fox turned by dogs at midnight. A woman who sat up sewing and saw the first crack open in the wall before anyone else heard the wind decide to be a trouble. A man who walked to the next house to borrow coals and returned with two neighbors who put their hands to his door just as the drift pinned it shut from outside. These are small epics told in kitchens that smell of cabbage and smoke. They crown no kings, but they lengthen winters by a manageable inch. If you could draw the watch, it would be a low arch, no glory. No drama spanning the coldest water of the night. On one side, the heavy dark full of the day's leftovers. On the other, the thinner gray where roosters begin to try their throats, and dogs remember they have patrols to make. Under the arch, you tend the ember, adjust the quilt, pass the cup, check the breath, and say the small words that build a house warm enough. Yes, awake a little. Will it hold it? When the arch has done its work, the second sleep takes you by the shoulders like a patient ant and steers you back into the warm, a slower part of night. The difference is, in your hands and in your jaw, tension tucked away as neatly as the mended cuff, the minute anxieties converted into inventory and plan. Your father's breath returns to a deeper register. The baby makes the little sleep sound that means milk will not be required until light dilutes the rafters. The ember does its fox in burrow breathing. The pig hums. You slide a knee toward the center to share what heat you've earned, and someone else meets you halfway. You think, one last moment, how practical a luxury this is to break the long black into pieces small enough to carry. Not all ages get to choose their sleep. This one does its best within the rules the cold sets. You turn your face to the wall. The scent is the solvent of thought. The watch closes behind you without a latch. Ahead waits the unimportant miracle of waking warm enough together. And ode to nothing the morning can't name: breath, ash, patience, bodies agreeing to be a house again. Something leans against the night and listens back. You feel it before you hear anything, a narrowness in the dark, a hush that isn't the house's hush. Then the long sound comes, poured, not shouted, from some low edge of the woods. A howl is not a story, and still it carries one. Your hand tightens on the quilt's edge. Your father's hand finds the staff beside the door without rising. You picture the animal that owns that voice, ribs like fingers under fur, winter making mathematics of its hunger. The hut answers with the only arithmetic it knows: body tighter, fire steadier, breath kept quiet where it can. Wolves belong to this weather as surely as frost and smoke. In summers, you sometimes forget them. In winters, even your dreams have tracks. People in market towns argue numbers, how many taken from which fold, whether there were bounties paid last year or only threats. But numbers are village talk, and you live in a house that keeps account of other things, of hens who still roost, of babies who woke, of doors that rattled once and then remembered their job. Still, the howl lays a cold ribbon through the room, and you follow it to the door with your mind, up the crack where the bar sits, down to the sill where snow has begun its slow siege. You know the defenses: A bar set into slots your father chiseled deeper each year until wood learned the shape of safety. A wedge at the threshold so the wind cannot gossip under the door. Iron near every vulnerable seam, not proud iron, just workman iron, a knife planted upright in the lintel when storms are expected. A nail crossed with its twin and tucked into the hurdle that keeps the pig from testing its opinions. Old women call iron a stone that remembers fire. Your mother calls it sense. On the tie beam above the hearth, the burned circles your grandmother taught you to make with a slow brand sit like a procession of a small suns. She called them eyes. They watch. You do not argue with the dead when they have given you a cheap protection that does not smoke. Juniper over the door, if you have it. Rowan tied with red thread if you can get a switch from the hedge. Because Rowan has a reputation for saying no to what comes invited only by fear. A pinch of salt poured in a thin line at the sill some nights when the snow hammers and the wind tries to pretend it can learn to work a latch. A bundle of herbs hanging brown and patient by the eaves, part pantry, part prayer. Your father laughs at charms when the sun is out. In deep winter, he leaves them alone, as one leaves a fence post that has held the same corner of field for years. The house can be made to talk loudly if it must. Pots struck with spoons at the edge of a village have turned a curious wolf away more than once. And dogs that belong to no one in particular acquire sudden owners when their throats prove they have opinions about the night. Somewhere a goose begins its famous argument with empty air, and you're half convinced that air listens. If you were outside, you would see the carding of tracks along the lane: fox, weasel, dog, wolf. All the lines of hunger and defiance written into snow's clean page. Inside, you hold your page shut and let the cold read its own story somewhere else. Raiders are a different grammar of danger, less myth, more man. They come in stories because stories are where we keep fear when our hands are busy. In certain years, when grain failed, men failed too. When hunger walks on two legs, it knows door bars as problems rather than mysteries. Yet winter is both ally and enemy in that regard. Roads are knotted with drifts. Weapons find the same cold your fingers do. And the village, when it chooses, has a choir of noises that make bravery feel like bad arithmetic. You have heard it once, not wolves, but men after dusk. Their steps unsure in snow they did not know as children. The dog 2 houses over found its full-throated self. A bell clanged from a cart tongue. Your father lifted the bar and then set it back, not to open, but to place his weight against it in a language everyone on both sides understood. The men went away angrier than wolves do, and the village came back to bed one noise at a time. Between the 2 teeth and hands, you house yourselves in ordinary rituals. Before the watch, you check the thatch pegs where the wind has tugged, and after the watch, you touch each child's hair once, not only to feel for fever, but to count numbers again. You count like a miser and like a saint. In the morning, there will be footprints where the yard was smooth. You will read them with your father, matching depth and pattern to stories told last winter. He will show you the display of a fox's foot and how the nails say dog. And the difference between the two is a comfort that can be held in the palm, what the learned call apotropaic. Your grandmother called good manners toward the unseen. She burned little hexafoils into the oak with a coal and told you not to stare at them like a fool. They are to be there, not to be looked at. She unrolled iron keys on the table at Candlemas to let the year's light learn the shapes that keep the house. She marked the first day of winter by tapping the door frame with a branch of holly 3 times. You thought it was theater when you were small. Now, with a pig for a stove and the idea of wolves at the tree line like a line of ink in your head, you see that theater and architecture have the same purpose. They hold people together in the same weather. Your father has no time for theater. When a storm leans down, he talks in terms of loads the pressure of a snow along a roof line, the cost in wood if the door seals itself with a drift, the way the bar must be lifted when weights shift, the handspan left between banked ash and a woodpile that wants to catch enthusiasm. Yet you have seen him pause sometimes at the threshold and touch the burned circles with his thumb as if counting them. He would call it a habit of old hands. You would call it what it is saying thank you to arrangements that work. Night makes the village a listening animal. There is an old rhythm for this, the cover fire bell, where towns have bells, the silence in places that cannot spare the copper. You have been sent out once in deep dusk to fetch a coal from a neighbor, because your own ember is sulked into gray. The lane was a spoon of cold. The hedge wrote knotted shadows across the snow. You tapped the pot lid as you ran back, the way children do to make themselves larger than they are. It worked, or nothing needed to be scared of you that night. Either way, the ember made it home. What you fear is not always what meets you. What meets you is not always what you feared. Winter is a teacher who accepts partial answers. Even danger can be made into inventory. The door bar, the staff, the pot lids ready to become bells, the iron set where a hand can find it without looking, the pinch of salt, the bundle of juniper, the burned circles and their quiet doctrine. These are tools no less than the poker and the broom. You keep them the way you keep wood, against a need that does not call ahead. There is pride tucked under the fear. You feel it when the night tests your hinge and finds you arranged for it. When the howl reaches thin into the yard and the pig does not bother to wake. You do not hate wolves, you hate hunger. The animal outside is a mirror in bad light. You know the rumors royal hunts in winter to thin the packs, payments for heads brought to the manor, saints who told wolves to sit and listen like parishioners. You also know the old man who walked out to cut brush and never came back with both hands. The stories hold each other in a tense friendship. In the spring, when bones appear where a snow has retreated, your father will speak to you in the voice he uses for instructions that must be learned only once. You will look hard and you will nod, and he will nod, and you will go home and press your palm flat against the warm side of a goat, because both things can be true. The world has teeth, and the world gives milk. If fear were a fire, you would bank it with ash and ask it to last without burning the roof. The house does this well when you let it. The cold wants you singular, pulled apart into bites the night can manage. The hut answers by saying no. We will be plural. You listen with the others, you silence with them. You make a little noise when noise is desired, and you make none when none is the price of rest. The charms are part of that grammar, so is the staff by the door. The saints named for hearth and throat are part, so is the practice run of lifting the bar at a whisper and setting it down again, the quiet exercise of hands learning weight. Another long howl, farther off now, perhaps moving along the ridge, perhaps no more than the animal telling its own ribs to wait one more hour for hunger to be answered. Your father loosens his grip on the staff but leaves it by the door. The gesture says what the burned circles say, what the iron says, what the wedge at the sill says. We are not foolish. Your mother's fingers, which stung Rosemary into a quilt last summer, smooth the baby's hair once. You press your feet against the pig and borrow its dignity. The goat, who has never pretended to be brave, makes a brief pas of disagreement at the season and then resumes being alive in a useful temperature. The bar holds, the charms hold, the hush returns, not empty now, but full of competence. The dangers have not gone anywhere. They have only found a house they do not own. You breathe and the breath does not hurry. You do not ask for a world without fear. You ask and receive. This a roof that answers. Hands that know their work. Small circles of burnt wood that look like eyes and act like memory. Iron that remembers fire. And the strange human luck of being many on a night that wanted you alone. The howl fades into distance. The room remembers its softer noises. You sleep because there is nothing else to do, and because everything you have done already is, for this hour, enough. Cold climbs up from the ground as if the earth were a deep well and your bones were a rope. To live here, you learn first not to lie on the well's lip. Between your body and the breath of soil, you stack what you can, layers of plant and skin and cloth, so air itself becomes a blanket and damp must argue with a forest of fibers before it can find you. This is the peasant's mattress, not a thing you buy once and bless forever, but a living shedding, settling a stack you rebuild as often as the season and your strength allow. The floor is packed earth clay, chaff, dung, and the memory of many sweepings hard, where feet have made a path, tender and dark, where meltwater finds its favorite corner. First onto that go rushes or reeds, thick as your hand if the last cutting was generous. Their hollow stems hold a little sky inside them. The air they trap is what keeps the cold from climbing as quickly. On top of rushes, you lay straw, the long stalks combed with your fingers so they lie mostly the same way. Prickly and bright when they're new, full of summer's noise when you press your ear close. Bracken, if you gathered enough before frosts took the hills. Finds a place too, its stiff fans make a good first layer because they do not surrender to damp as quickly as a straw does. A better year one where the lambing went kindly or a neighbor remembered. Your help adds hides to the stack. A sheepskin knows your shins like a friend. Fur up in the dead of winter. Leather up when thaw turns the world to soup and you need something you can wipe. A deer hide, if luck or a snare gave you one, spreads wider than your family has elbows. It smells of forest for a month and then of a smoke. These are not luxuries in the way a merchant's feather bed is a luxury. They are decisions that reach your toes hours after you make them, and your toes vote gratitude during the second sleep. Over this nest goes whatever cloth has been stitched from the biography of your house, linen grown honest thin by years, wool thick with scorches that tell the story of two close embers, a quilt of pieced scraps heavy with colors that once answered to onion skins and madder and walnut. The quilt's weight presses the straw so it learns to lie obedient. Your body's weight teaches it a different lesson, flattening the center where everyone gravitates and leaving the edges pillowy enough to mock the middle. Each night is a negotiation with that geography child to the hollow, elder to the edge, the youngest shuttled inward again and again by hands that remember drafts as a language. You have tricks. Stones warmed in the banked hearth and wrapped in rag go to the foot of the bed an hour before bodies do. So toes find last light from the fire waiting. A clay pot, emptied of embers and corked against foolishness, hides under the quilt like a tame comet. In places where bracken grows brave, folks lay it ribcage up under the straw so damp drains through 1,000 little valleys instead of lying flat and sulking into chill. When the weather is mean beyond talk, you tuck a little straw into the hem of a tunic or wrap your calves with the scraps so your own clothing becomes the first mattress you carry. Nothing here is permanent. Straw that sang when you scattered it becomes a choir with a cough. It drinks what spills: broth, water, milk, and holds the ghost of those kindnesses until the air remembers other stories. After a week, it lies. After 2, it sulks. After 3, it begins to smell like a summer stable, with winter's bad manners. When the lane opens and you can cut a little more, you do, rolling the old bedding up with its fleas and sorrows and carrying it outside like a bad season. You can actually lift. Often you cannot. Then you pluck the worst and patch the rest, and herbs do what they can. Fleas belong to the bed the way starlings belong to the thatch. You curse them without ceremony and scratch with more honesty than rage. A pinch of ash rubbed into a seam vexes them, a sprig of rosemary, summer saved in green memory, tucked at the edge of the palate makes them think twice. Smoke from the hearth helps a stinging. Yes, but it leaves a taste in wool and fur that bites back. Mice make their politics in the straw, feet like secrets under your ear, and you learn to set your traps in the dark by feel. A small engineering that becomes a kind of pride. Sometimes you dream with an ear to the bedding, and the straw tells you stories you didn't ask for. You hear the pigs a slow turning of sleep. A hen's weight change on the beam becomes a crackle at your shoulder through the pallet's wires of sound. A goat's hoof scratches once, and the scratch travels the floor to your skull like a message. You could mistake it for fear's language. It is only how crowded life writes itself through whatever medium is handy. In the morning, when you beat the folded pallet with a stick outside to wake the neighbor's fleas and forgive your own, the sound is thunder and theatrics in equal measure. People with carved headboards and curtains thick as a priest's winter cloak sleep higher, further from the earth's cold grammar. Their mattresses are ticks, fat with feathers or wool, ropes under them turned by a key to tighten the whole arrangement. Curtains keep heat like a secret only 2 people know, and the rest of the room must guess at. You have seen such beds in a manor hall once, your feet unsure on a floor that didn't answer back with dirt. You wished for the curtains for an hour and then thought of a child coughing behind them where no one could hear, and the wish learned manners. There are days when the pallet is a cradle. Birth happens here, where a smoke has polished the rafters and the pig hums in its sleep. The first sound a child knows is the currency of breath being traded at ear level. There are nights when the pallet is a boat, carrying fevers across black water with a baked stone for a sun. There will be a day when it is a beer because it witnesses everything. The bedding has a memory longer than any one of you can hold alone. Perhaps that is another reason the smell of it doesn't trouble you as sorely as it would a stranger. The scent is not filth, but record. In the dim between sleeps, you learn a craftsperson's attention to small borders, where a straw has thinned to a whisper near the door. You move what little you can spare from the far edge and tell your hip to be less precious. You turn the pallet so the hollow that knew everyone's shoulders last week will meet everyone's toes this week. When a snow has lent its wet arithmetic to one corner, you steal extra bracken from under the goat's hay rack and promise to carry 2 more armfuls in spring. These are math problems without numbers, solved by weight and apology. There are words sewn into this knowledge that do not live in church books. Paillasse is what a French trader called his straw tick when he tried to sell your uncle a thing stuffed with last year's fields and bound in linen. Your uncle laughed and tapped your own palate with his stick. We already own the word straw. In other places, people give names to beds built into walls, cupboards for sleeping. Here the wall sweats from the snow on the other side, and your bed is better as a movable feast. Names are nice. Warmth is imperative. If the ground is the enemy, it is a courteous one. It warns you damp on the knuckles, a sheen on the packed floor, where a footprint dries slower than its neighbor. When you see that, you lean the bedding back like a book and let the hearth's breath flip its pages dry. Your mother stands there with her hands on her hips and judges the air by how quickly the quilt stops steaming. There is a right time to put the bed back down, and if you misjudge it, you pay in coughs you cannot afford. In the morning, you do what can be done. Shake, beat, scatter herbs, throw back the quilt to let smoke borrow it for a while, rake out the most disobedient straw, and feed it to the fire in a little burst of summertime sound. If there is enough, you tuck a double layer where the baby will nap, so that sleep is something kind rather than something won from ache. You learn to see bedding not as furniture but as livestock. It needs tending. It returns warmth when treated right. It sulks when neglected. And when it ages out of usefulness, it still gives back. One final flare in the hearth. One last sweet smell of grass. By midnight, the geography you curated is already altered by bodies and breath. The hollow grows, the edge cools. Someone's heel finds the warmed stone, and someone else's foot pushes it greedily closer to the middle without waking to confess the theft. The palate makes you honest about being plural. There is no keeping a comfort to yourself in a house like this, unless you want to hear about it later in a tone you don't enjoy. You pull the hide's edge over your sister's wrist when she forgets it. She tucks the quilt under your shoulder when you roll and leave your neck to the draft. Nobody says thank you because the bed has taught you that thanks is a verb done back. If you press your palm flat into the straw when the last ember is smothered for morning and the door is wedged to comb the smoke, you can feel the history of the night under your hand. A little damp where breath gathered, a ribbon of warmth where the pig exhaled against the hurdle, a starburst of pressure where your father's elbow found patience, or your mother's hand lay on the baby's belly. The bed tells you you were many, you were warm enough, You made something like comfort out of the stalks and the skins and breath. That is the lesson it teaches better than any sermon. Comfort here is not a softness, it is fit, the right layer in the right place, the right share given to the one who needs it most, the right stone wrapped in the right rag at the right time. It is the memory your body keeps of how the straw whispered when it was new, and how, even when it learned less lovely songs, you made it sing tolerable ones again by beating, turning, tucking, sharing. The ground will always try to pull your warmth down into itself. The palate is how you answer with plants that remember the sun, with hides that remember backs and bellies, with cloth that remembers every pair of hands that mended it, with a quilt that remembers every shoulder it covered. Between earth and bone, you make your own weather and call it bed. Night here is never quiet in the way a stone is quiet. It is quiet the way a river is full of its own speech, steady enough that you forget you're listening until a different note enters. The house carries 1,000 small sounds, and none of them ask permission. Rafters groan like old men stretching. The thatch hisses when frost loosens its grip and slips in pale sheets to the ground. Somewhere near the door, snow scabs off a boot and falls with a sound like folded cloth. Inside the nest, breath does the good work, layered, uncoordinated, stubborn as weeds. Your father's is long and serviceable, a saw that knows the timber it is cutting. Your mother's is a seamstress's breath, counted without counting. Children sound like bellows left to the fire. One big pull and then a tumble of small ones because sleep has other errands for them. The animals sing their own part. The pig has a hum that is entirely self-congratulation. It achieves the temperature it insists on, and then it's about approving it. Hens talk in sleep rustle, tick, sigh, shifting hopes from one foot to the other. A goat clears its throat politely now and again, perhaps to remind the world that it has opinions about a straw. Their sounds, gathered and stacked with the human ones, do what a proper roof does, keep the weather out. Travelers write, when they bother with houses like this, that the noise kept them from sleeping. They are not wrong, but they are missing half the truth. Silence is a luxury and also a hazard. In a room like this, if the breathing stops, if the pig falls quiet, if the thatch does not answer the wind, you sit upright and learn how fast you can place your feet on cold earth. Quiet in this world is a bell. Noise is reassurance. You could identify your family in a lane by the way they sleep as easily as by the way they walk your younger brother's nasal trumpet, your sister's little whistles, your aunt's stop-start that forces the room to wait for the next breath. You play a children's game in yourself some nights, counting them, cataloging, setting them on a shelf. Here is snore, here is whistle, here is hum, here is cough. You reach the number that says everyone belongs to morning, and then you sleep. There's a rule in winter that no one wrote and everyone obeys. Words are expensive at night. The smoke taxes them. The cold taxes them. The room's many ears tax them. You speak if something needs doing: stone to be warmed, ember to be fed, baby to be turned, door to be wedged, and your voice goes soft without anyone having to tell it to. Hush is not holiness here. It is thrift. Your grandmother had a phrase for it that sounded like a proverb, even if it wasn't still tongues. warm bones. In summer, she told jokes while shelling peas. In January, she answers all questions with her hands. It is not that music is forbidden. It comes like a mercy when it can. Some nights, in the slot between sleeps, your mother's voice finds the line she always finds, half hum and half word, rock and river at once. She does not sing for performance, but for pulse. The tune itself is older than her and simpler, designed to travel the short distance from mouth to ear and spend no extra breath. The baby leans into it without deciding to. You do too, though you would deny it if teased. Songs in this house wear useful clothes. They teach children to stay under the quilt. They borrow saints when fear comes hunting. They fold warnings into measures small enough to swallow. There are lullabies that mention frost as if it were a neighbor to be kept on good terms, and others that treat the fire like a guest who must not be allowed to leave offended. Between the sung and the spoken lies, the other talk the instruments of the house. A poker set down with a particular decisiveness means the ash has been banked right and you can carry your worry somewhere else. 2 hollow knocks from the door's bar say that the wedge needs adjusting. A ladle placed at the foot of the hearth, not on its peg, means the pot will need turning as soon as the watch returns with breath to spare. You would not describe this as language if asked, but your hands answer it long before your head supplies names. Water tells on the roof. A bead forming where thaw sneaks through thatch has its own exact syllable when it lets go and hits the bucket. 1 drop is an irritation. 2 in company are a complaint. 3 and more are a plan you must make in the morning, because that much water in this kind of cold means a patch has failed or a fox has learned to be clever with teeth. The house repeats the sentence all night, so that when light returns, you can translate it with poles and twine before the problem makes a joke of your bed. Mice have their own handwriting. In summer, you ignore them. A handful of grain buys you an hour's peace from worrying about larger beasts. In winter, you listen more closely. A long, fast scribble under the pallet says they are traveling. A stop and chew near the grain says traps will be baited at dawn with the heel of bread that pretended to be too hard for people. Your uncle swears he can tell a weasel's little arrhythmic feet from a mouse's determined ones without lifting his head. You believe him because he has the kind of face that invents nothing when it already has enough to manage. Sometimes the house sings back to the weather, and that chorus is not shy. The wind finds the eaves and makes a reed of them. The whole structure becomes a flute. At such times, there is no point in pretending you are asleep. You let the sound come through you the way river comes through a net. Everything you cannot hold sliding past, and you draw comfort from the fact that timbers speak when they are working. A silent beam in a storm is worse news than a vocal one. Creak is the promise of elasticity. Crack is the warning no one wants to hear. You have heard both, you prefer the first, and do the practical things one does for the second move, bodies toward the center. Shove the pole up to kiss the ridge. Whisper a bargaining prayer with the names you have learned to say in bad weather. There are jokes in this noise too, because people teach themselves to live with things. On crowded nights, someone will mutter who's playing the saw when your father's snore achieves a certain talent. Your sister? With the cruelty only siblings deliver safely, will call another cousin's snorts a huntsman's horn. Laughter stays small and leaves no wake. The game is a way to mark that everybody is still here and still capable of being annoying. In spring, you might fight about the cup that wasn't washed or the gate that wasn't latched. In winter, you convert irritation into taxonomy and to spare yourself the heat you cannot afford to raise for nothing. There is a different kind of listening under the common one, the one you do when a cough becomes something else. The first two are interruptions. The third asks for a hand on a shoulder and a piece of wool pulled up over a chest. If the cough carries heat, the next sound in the room is the scrape of iron as a stone is eased into embers. If it carries a whistle, that should not be there. The next is the creak of the door as it opens a thumb's width to draw a straight line of air through smoke. In a bigger house, you would send someone for a candle. In this one, you make do with the sound a clay pot makes when you set it near the coals and the steam that rises when you pour a little water inside. These sounds are medicine without a physician. Neighbors enter your night in noises you did not invite and are grateful for. The dog at the next door speaks to a shadow it knows too well. A goose at the edge of the yard honks an entire bar of disapproval and everything in you unclenches, because geese are professional worriers. And if they are scolding, danger has been converted into annoyance. From farther off, a cart's iron rim strikes a frozen rut, someone riding the watch longer than you are tonight. You do not know their name and need not. The sound says the road still exists. The world has not been folded up and put away without you. There is a kind of quiet you do keep for yourselves, and you cherish it. It is the moment after a child has been soothed and before anyone needs to shift. It is the breath right after the ember has accepted its blanket. It is the long, low room silence that means no one is listening for steps outside because everyone has decided there will not be any. It lasts 3 heartbeats, sometimes 4, sometimes a whole handful if the weather is merciful. In that quiet, your mind does its tidying. The day's frayed edges get tucked roughly into the drawer where they belong, and the next day's list chooses its first line. Then the pick hums again, and you smile into the wool and give thanks for ordinary noise. You would be astonished if you woke in a future with walls that swallow sound at how lonely you would feel. For now, you are grateful to live in a box that tells you the truth constantly about how many breaths are being taken inside it. The soundscape is not romance, it is inventory, it is prayer, it is a hearth with ears, and on the nights when fear leans against the door, this river of a small sound keeps you on your feet until courage finds you again. You turn your cheek to the coarse weave of the quilt and let the noises stack themselves back into background. A drip, a tick, a hum, a creak, a small joke under breath, a breath caught and let go. The house resumes its low, complicated lullaby, and you are one voice in the choir you will miss when it changes, and will forgive because change is the tax life pays to go on. You sleep, not in silence, but in proof. Wind does not knock here. It lays its whole body along the house and waits to see who gives first. You feel it before it finds a voice, the pressure on the door bar, the faint lift under the thatch where a careless spar invites experiment. the way smoke hesitates in the throat of the room and then decides to stay low. The timbers answer in their known grammar. One board complains, another replies. The ridge gives a long, patient note like a boat rope under weight. You lie very still and listen for the difference between working wood and failing wood. Creak is a promise, crack is a confession. Storm nights convert the hut into a ship. The floor is the deck. Not quite level and honest about it. Beams are masts that learned humility. You move the crew toward the middle, where the floor's warmth knows its job, and you make a harbor of your bodies. The pole your father keeps for this very hour peeled ash. Smooth as a tool handle comes out from its corner. He plants it under the ridge, foot set against a stone, shoulder leaning with a practiced tenderness. It looks like he's holding the roof up with one arm. He would not say it that way. He would say, "Give the weight a place to go." Outside, the wind builds paragraph after paragraph across the thatch. The roof answers with the hiss of a straw shifting in small slides, then with the dull slap of a patch that was too clever for its own peg. Thatch is not a hat. It is a field braided up and told to remember. Hazel sways pin it. Rods at the eaves discipline its ambitions. The ridge is stitched with heather like a seam that never stops being mended. You have watched the roof learn its manners every summer and forget them just enough each winter to be interesting. Tonight it is modest. It takes the storm's hands and bends. And what doesn't bend gets a talking to in the morning. You recognize a storm work by sound and by what it does to smell. Smoke comes down and sits in the room like a guest you did not invite. And at first, you grind your teeth. Then you remember the other arithmetic smoke drives, damp from the wall that would otherwise take the wind's side. Smoke makes the fleas think twice about founding a town in the quilt. Smoke is a small tax you pay to keep the roof. Your father opens the door a finger's width to comb the air. Cold arrives with an opinion, but the ember breathes better and the room's eyes sting less. You pull the quilt higher and teach your face to be grateful for both contradictions at once. There are rights you do not call rights because the work justifies the gesture. Heft the door bar not to open, but to feel its weight and remind your hands where its strength lives. Press a palm to the post by the latch. Dry means safe. Damp means polite anxiety. Wet means you will be moving things at dawn. Tap the Louvre with the pole so it remembers to sit where it was told. Touch the burned circles your grandmother branded into the beam with a coal a decade ago. If anyone asks you about them, you say they are old wood, nothing more. Your thumb says otherwise, and your breath thanks what it cannot name. Storms like to find the weak and name them. The bucket in the corner learns a new drip. You count its syllables, not yet, not yet, not yet now. A child shifts. Your mother tucks the blanket by habit. The pig grunts at weather as if it were a personal rival. The goat, who is honest, complains. You decide to admire the animal's good sense rather than envy it. When danger decides to be practical, beasts become instruments. A restless hen is a rumor. A restless goat is a headline. A pig that sits all the way up is a sermon. Tonight, the pig continues to hum approval at its own warmth. The sermon can wait. If the wind is from the north, the door takes a beating. If from the west, the gable learns new words. The old men in the lane argue which wind is honest and which is sly. Your father says all winds pay in the same coin if you give them time. He wedges the threshold so the draft cannot gossip under it and sets the staff across the bar so it will not jump in its sleep. He glances once at the knife that lives upright in the lintel. He would never say iron keeps trouble where it belongs. He will say iron is good at remembering what it has done before. Storm work has its quiet mathematics. How much wood left, measured not in logs, but in mornings. How many patches of damp in the floor, measured not in puddles, but in children's coughs. How many warm stones you can spare to smuggle into the pallet without picking a fight with prudence. You are surprised each time how much the night will answer to small numbers done faithfully. A wedge, a pole, a finger of air, a hand on a head. It feels inadequate to the wind's theater. It is not. Houses are saved in inches. There are stories you were told as a child about nights like this. Stories built to be repeated when roofs lean and faces go gray with thinking too hard. A woman heard the first crack because she was awake to mend a cuff, and everyone moved in time. A boy's pot of coals, carried under cloak from a neighbor to neighbor, made 3 hearths into one until dawn. A man set his back under the beam and felt it give, and bent with it just enough, just long enough until the squall passed like a bad dream. They are not clean stories. They end with splinters, bruises, burned fingers, wet shoulders. That is why people keep them. You stack them with the kindling in your head. You prepare for the other half of the storm's lesson without looking like you are. The shovel stands by the door because snow will have pretensions when the wind puts its shoulder down. You've seen a drift seal a door like a coffin lid, and you have seen a father swore by all that is practical while he scrapes a tunnel with his own arms to get the air and the exit back. Tonight, the wind is a talker more than a mason. You will be grateful for that when your toes find morning. There is a debate you have heard in the alehouse when the weather is someone else's. Do drifts kill, or do they save? Some say snow against the wall is a blanket God throws over the house. Others say it is a hand on the chest. Both are true and not at the same time. Against the north wall, a high drift stops drafts and makes the room's edges feel courteous. Across the door, it tries to change the subject. You handle both by checking, not by judging. Your father will open the door 2 fingers at the hinge twice before dawn, just to teach the drift that people live here. As for the roof's weight, there is a farmer's prayer you have never heard in church, spoken with a broom in hand down. Then you stand by while he lifts the thatch with the broom's back through the loft hatch, once, twice, so snow will slide and not settle. The sound it makes outside is a soft surrender, a sack of flour spilling its temper. Each slide gives the rafters a new tone in their singing, lower, less anxious. You like that sound in the same way you like a child's first long, even exhale after a fever breaks. The house breathes again. Storms test more than wood and thatch. They test the style of your silence. You keep jokes small to fit the air you can afford. You keep your fear folded and put it under the pig for warmth. You use your hands for what they can do and accept that theology is not extra rope. Still, you name saints when the beam gives that particular note: Bridget for hearth, Blaise for throats, Joseph for timber, and if anyone were to accuse you of superstition, you would point at the pole and the wedge and invite them to find a better word for prudence that also blesses it. When the gusts lengthen and the intervals grow honest, when the hut's flute lowers its pitch and the thatch stops talking about itself, sleep walks back into the room. It isn't trust, exactly. It is a ceasefire you are too tired to refuse. Your father leaves the pole in place and eases down beside it, as if it were a companion who will not mind a heavy head. Your mother's hand stays open on the baby's back, a weight that tells the storm it can try the door again, but it cannot have this. You close your eyes into a sound that is almost a lullaby wind grown bored with its own arguments. The ridge muttering about its duty, but not offended. Embers steady under ash, a tiny drip that has learned to wait between drops. You find the middle of the pallet with your knee, and it finds you, and the quilt remembers how to be a tent again. The house has been made smaller by what pressed on it. That smallness is not defeat. It is shelter earned. The field will be white in the morning, and the lane will pretend not to exist, and the bucket will need moving, and 3 pegs will need new hazel ties. All of that is tomorrow. Tonight the ship floats, the crew sleeps, the mast hums to itself, the storm, denied drama, goes to scold the ridge above the next house, where another pole is already waiting like a good answer. Hunger keeps its own clock in winter, and it strikes now after the storm has talked itself hoarse, after the ember has agreed to breathe until dawn, after the room has lowered its voice. It is not the sharp bite that makes you lightheaded at midday. It is the dull companion that sits on the pallet's edge and asks for a small kindness. Your mother feels it arrive the way she feels the baby's stir. She reaches past the quilt, past the cloak folded for a makeshift bolster, to the basket tucked behind the hearthstone. Linen unwraps with the soft complaint of old cloth, and inside is the answer night will accept bread, not generous, just present. The loaf is not today's, it is yesterday's or the day before, a round of rye and barley, maybe a seam of wheat if the harvest was kind or the Lord's miller looked the other way. It smells faintly of sour, the faithful pet of a sourdough leaven that shares your home and your breath, and of smoke from every room it has slept in. She turns it and listens, because a good loaf tells you when it is about to give up. A knife becomes a bell. The crust cracks like ice. The crumb offers a polite resistance. She breaks rather than cuts, saving the blade for mornings when impatience is more expensive. The order is known without being drilled. Your father's cough has been an argument all week. His piece is bigger and no one calls it charity. The smallest mouths share the center, where the crumb remembers moisture. Older teeth take the heel and pretend to prefer it. A corner is chipped off for the goat, not because the goat deserves it, but because the goat's opinion of the night's piece matters and bribes are old technology. Your mother keeps the last piece for herself and eats it absent-mindedly. A woman who has learned to be full of the fact of feeding more than of food. Ale follows, thin and kind. It has been warming near the hearth where pots go to eavesdrop. Your father handles the wooden mug the way he handles the ember, careful as if it were a small animal likely to bolt. You know this ale? It is not festival strong. It is small beer, brewed to be bread you can drink. safer than the brook that carries every field's memories, and kinder to bellies that have been bargaining with cabbage for days. He passes the mug. A sip is enough. The taste is earthy, a little sour, with a shy sweetness when you swallow the ghost of malt, the promise of calories that will be measured later in a steadier sleep. Sometimes, when honey ran well in summer or a neighbor owed a favor in autumn, there's a touch of something extra, a thread of a sweetness stirred in, or a hint of a spice saved from a saint's day. Tonight there is none. Tonight the luxury is heat. The mug gives back to your fingers what the floor took. The first mouthful reminds your chest what ease feels like. You cannot buy much in January. You can purchase a pause, and ale is a coin that still spends. On certain nights, there is broth, thin and honest, made from yesterday's pottage coaxed back from the pot, in a ladle or two. Your mother sets the small clay bowl near the embers with a warmed stone in its belly, and the steam that lifts is a blessing heavier than any word. You sip it, and it tastes like a memory of meat, like onions a grandfather might call extravagant, like the color green smuggled in from last year's garden by drying and faith. You soak a piece of bread in it and eat with your eyes closed. Sops are a poor man's miracle stale turned into soft. Yesterday into now, these night mouthfuls follow rules that make sense to bodies older than books. Children who slept through the first sleep wake just enough to take a touch of something warm and then slide back without protest. Old folks sip twice, cough once, and pronounce themselves pacified. Workers let the heat find the knots in their backs and feel bones decide not to trouble them further. The ale will not make anyone drunk. It will make thoughts quieter. It will smooth the hinge between wakefulness and second sleep, so the mind can climb down without scraping its shins. Bread at this hour has theology without church. It is ritual and ration at once. You do not toss crumbs. There is a way to gather them with a wetted fingertip and feed them to the fire as a private joke. Let the hearth taste what it made possible. Your grandmother called that a tithe. Your father calls it tidy. You call it the kind of nonsense that keeps a house stitched. The pig snuffs and will not be invited because a pig invented greed and needs no assistance. The hens mutter from their beam as if reciting their own grace. Someone always remembers a story, not a feast tale, but one built for winter, the time the dough rose in the near cold because it was set by the hearth where the embers' sleep was warm. The time the ale went sour too fast, and your uncle saved it by turning it into vinegar, which saved onions, which saved a week. The time a neighbor's child would not sleep until the crust was dipped in ale and pressed to his lips, and then he slept and woke with a temper good enough to share. Little parables of kitchen physics handed along with the mug and the loaf. There are economies nested in these bites and sips. Grain stretches by habit and by invention. Maslin, the honest mix of wheat and rye, becomes a loaf that forgives a lean year in one field by borrowing from another. Spent grains from brewing go into pottage where no one will notice and everyone will thank you. The last dip of whey from a summer cheese keeps a crust soft enough to chew when teeth have decided to be absent. Night food is accounting. You can taste what is left, how to make it carry one more hour, whom to give first without making a speech about it. You do not drink water at night unless you must. and even then you scald it first if the fire is in a mood to help. You've seen what thaw does to the well, how runoff turns truth cloudy, how ice keeps secrets you would rather not swallow. Small beer is safer than ignorance. It is a simple decision that embarrasses no one because everyone makes it. The mug is communal and unashamed. A sleeve wipes it clean and passes it on. A sleeve in winter is a cloth that has sworn to do more than one job. Sometimes the night offers posset milk turned luxurious by heat, and a little ale thickened to a gentleness that sits nicely on a tired stomach. That is high weather, church weather, Christmas weather. Tonight is ordinary weather, and ordinary gives more often than festival does. The ordinary gift is enough a mouthful that says your stomach will not gnaw at your sleep. A swallow that says your bones can stop bargaining for a while. After the last sip, there is a choreography of putting away. The cloth folds over the bread with a pat, as if to tuck it down the way you tucked the ember. The mug returns to its hook, with the handle pointed the right way, so the hand that needs it later will not fumble. The bowl is tipped to steam itself clean by the ember's patient breath. These gestures are a catechism. They tell your hands what the world will need from them when the light returns. You notice on nights like this how warmth reorganizes the house. People lean a fraction closer to one another without planning to. Jokes steal in under breath. Your father remembers a harvest when the sheaves stood taller than the littlest child and laughs once, a low sound that settles everyone's shoulders. Your mother licks her thumb and presses a crumb from the baby's lip with a tenderness so practiced it looks like instinct. The hour is no longer only endured, it is occupied. Hunger is not fooled by ceremony. It knows when it has been postponed rather than cured. But postponement can be a kind of mercy, and this one comes with flavor. Your stomach loosens its fist. Your eyes stop listening for the door. The second sleep arrives with a better temper. You feel bread sit on its shelf inside you and it'll wrap itself around the stiff places like wool. Around you, breathing changes register, the room retunes itself a whole tone lower. You tuck the quilt under your chin and under your sister's hand and under your father's shoulder because sharing heat follows the same rules as sharing bread. The ember's fox eye watches from its burrow. The goat sighs as if it had been included in the portion. The pig agrees to stop offering its opinions for a while. The house's noises resume their old, friendly shapes. You drift, not because night has been made short or hunger small, but because small things crumb, sip, steam have made you large enough to cross the remaining dark without losing yourself on the way. Illness comes into the hut like weather felt before it is seen, named only after it has rearranged the furniture of the night. It sits down in your father's chest with a wet, patient insistence and teaches his cough a new grammar, one hard splinter, then a dragging rasp, then a breath that sounds as if the ribs are bargaining with the lungs. In daylight, he jokes at it. At this hour, no one bothers with wit. Your mother lifts a hand from the baby and lays it on his sternum, the way one palm tests a door for warmth on the other side. Heat answers. The room changes its breathing to accommodate. There is always a first measure, and it is small. A stone from the edge of the banked hearth goes into the embers to gather courage. When it glows dull inside its skin, your mother lifts it with the poker and wraps it in a folded cloth, knots made with the briskness of long practice. The bundle becomes a tame son. She settles between his shirt and the worn wool laid over him. He speaks to the cough in a language the cough cannot resist. He exhales through his teeth a sound halfway to relief, and the room allows itself one shared breath. On the shelf behind the hearth is an onion that has been waiting for this exact hour. Your mother cuts it without ceremony. The knife winging through the papery skin, she breathes through her mouth against tears and presses the cut face to the place where breath seems to snag, binding it there with the ribbon torn from a shirt so mended it is more thread than cloth. Garlic would do. If garlic were in the house, vinegar would do. If vinegar were not already married to onions in a jar with a twig of rosemary. The whole thing a sharp-smelling promise kept for fever days. These are not prescriptions in a book. They are arrangements in a life. You have seen them work often enough to call them sense instead of story. Steam helps a chest learn humility. A bowl chipped on the lip where someone once argued with it is filled with hot water ladled off the pottage. Time goes in because time grows like a generous gossip in summer and dries well. Sage goes in because your grandmother said gray leaves for gray weather, and you have not found a better rule. Your father bends over the bowl. Your mother lifts the quilt over his head, tenting esteem and man together. Under the blanket, he looks like a child sheltering under a cloak in rain. The cough tries to make a point and ends up loosening. You hear him spit into a rag and you look at the ceiling because manners live here too. Smoke has been an enemy all winter. Now you remember it is also a doctor with bad bedside manners. It stings eyes to keep vermin from enjoying the same bed you do. It dries wall and beam where damp would open doors to worse. It steals a little air and gives a little medicine. And after so many nights, you have learned to accept the bargain. Your mother, who believes in saints when work is done, and in work when saints are busy, opens the door a finger's width to draw a straight line of air across the bowl. Steam rises like a benediction and vanishes. The hut ignores theology when physics is available. Humors are not a word anyone here would use, but their logic lives behind the knuckles. Cold and wet have laid their hands on your father. Heat and dry must answer. The warmed a stone, the blanket's weight, the steam's persuasion, the onion's a sharpness, the spiced a small beer. If there is a thimbleful of nutmeg left from Christmas, these shift balances in a body the way wedges shift them in a door. If the cough climbs toward fever, there will be a different argument as sweating under layered cloth until the bed smells like a brewery and a stable, and the patient wakes as if dragged across a river. When that works, the relief is a public holiday of its own. Sleep is medicine, say the old men who do not sleep well. Your mother believes them to the extent that she can enforce it. After the stone cools, after the bowl has given what it can, she pulls wool higher, props his shoulder so fluid drains where gravity will do what doctors cannot. She will do it again in an hour and tell you she dreamed through it. You will believe her because to sleep in this house is not oblivion, but a braid rest and watchfulness twisted together until neither can be separated from the other without losing a strength. Children are moved toward the center when illness sets its cup down on the palate, not because they are less precious, but because heat gathers there, and heat is body armor. The edge belongs to old folks who insist they do not mind the draft. Tonight, the edge belongs to old folks who will not catch what your father has if breath does not travel so far. The goat, sensitive to human sorrow, not from pity, but from being a goat, murmurs disapproval of the rearrangement and then accepts it, her breath smoking in the half-light like a little chimney. The pig continues to applaud itself for possessing the perfect internal temperature for sleeping through other people's problems. Stories arrive at the same time as remedies because hands that also tend to talk. Your mother remembers the winter when a neighbor lost his voice to a cough and found it again by sipping warmed ale with honey and a beaten egg whisked in until the whole cup became gentle and thick. Your father, head still under the quilt from a steaming, thumps in agreement a proof of life. You have heard other stories that are ambulance and warning both the time the cough took a child too quickly to bargain with, the time a fever burned hot and left cleverness one room smaller when it finally eased. People here do not decorate these tales with adjectives. They place them on the shelf of the mind with the vinegar and the thyme. There are charms, of course. St. Blaise for throats has heard more village Latin than any bishop ever will. Your mother whispers his name and St. Bridget's in the same breath he for the cough, she for the hearth that keeps the cough from being king. A cross drawn in ash on the beam above your father's head is not medicine, but it is not medicine either. It is a mark that says, we meant to keep you. If your grandmother were here, she would unroll her packet of nonsense and wisdom little bones, a scrap of red thread, a tiny coin angry with wear and a stitch, one into the hem of the quilt with a motion that dismisses argument. Your mother keeps the packet but uses the thread. You do not begrudge the theater. Winter is a long engagement. Everyone is allowed a costume now and then. Arguments still live under the roof even when coughs move in. The small beer should be warmed, says your mother. Honey is for the baby, says your father. Honey will do more in his chest than in his stomach, says your mother. Your father closes his eyes and drinks. The old aunt says mustard and flaxseed made into a poultice will pull heat where it belongs. The neighbor who learned a thing or two from a traveling leech says cupping is the way, but has no cups of her own. Everyone has a recipe. Experience's handwriting is messy but legible. The room chooses 3 and leaves the rest for mornings when debate is cheaper. You think for a moment of the road to the market town, of the man with a bag of tools who calls himself learned and knows Latin names for leaves, by their behavior. Sometimes he is worth his coin. Sometimes he is a different species of poultry pretending to lay eggs. Tonight, he is a story told to the esteem far off, unavailable, possibly helpful next week. What you have is what you can reach from the palate without waking the whole village onion, a stone, steam, wool, a saint or two, a small beer warmed in a ladle, patience measured in breaths. It is tempting, when illness sits close, to become an accountant of risk. You count coughs and breaths and sips and the minutes between. You count how many logs you can afford to spend if the fever climbs. You count children each time anyone rises, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the numbers comfort you in a way no doctrine can do. Counting is how the fearful learn to speak without pleading. The hut helps it report faithfully on respirations and drips and animal opinions. Noise that would annoy you in the summer becomes a monitor now, a proof that life is fully shared. Between remedies, there is the work of hands that involves no herb at all. Your mother rubs your father's back with goose fat, warmed by the ember, her palm making circles as old as any saint's day. Oil would be a castle's luxury. Fat is a cottage's virtue. The skin drinks it, and the cough answers by loosening. Not dramatically, there are no sermons in this house tonight, but enough that breath finds the long path again rather than the short, ragged one. She tucks wool around him right after trapping heat like a clever thief. He sleeps a little, and in a room where every breath tutors the next, that little counts as wealth. Sickness spreads where air is a shared blanket. Everyone knows this, and no one can do much about it in January. You accept risk the way you accept weather, with preparation and a refusal to make speeches to the sky. The door opens a thumb and closes. A damp cloth finds a brow and is rung on the sill. A pot is shifted an inch so its steam will serve human throats before it goes to the rafters to argue with snow. Small rearrangements make a larger mercy. Toward the end of the watch, the cough grows less ambitious. The stone has cooled for the second time and been replaced. The onion has given its sting to the air and rests on the hearth like a spent cartridge. The bowl's water stands clear again, its herbs sunk like old news. Your mother's posture softens from ready to waiting. She does not say relief out loud. She ties a new knot in the rag and sets it aside where her hand will find it without looking. Your father snores, a sound you once mocked and now adore because it has returned to being a carpenter's saw rather than a broken hinge. The room pulls its heat back toward the center, as if recognizing the permission in that to sleep. You tug the quilt under your father's elbow with a competence that makes you proud in a quiet, private way. The pig hums, the goat yawns in the only way goats know how, a small curse delivered as gratitude. The embers blink under ash like patient animals. You tip your head against the rough wool and feel the knot in your own neck let go a little. The illness is not gone. Winter is not done. Morning will ask for wood and water and a dozen other proofs that you are alive. Yet something has turned. Weather is still outside. Inside is breath that belongs to you. You close your eyes and listen until listening becomes sleeping. Steam and a stone and onion and thread. These are the saints you can put your hands on. The others you name softly for courtesy and hope. The house has not made a miracle. It has made do. And in this season that is indistinguishable from grace, dawn begins here not as light, but as a change in temperature, a coolness that stops trying to be a threat and settles for being a fact. Your eyelids open before your thoughts do. The ember still lives under its ash, one fox eye, then two, when your father strokes the gray blanket with the poker and the red brightens as if reminded of its job. Night is not ended, night is revised. The room remains itself wool and breath, straw and animal opinion, the faint sweet and sour of yesterday's bread, the ache that is not pain so much as proof, but something outside is loosening. You can hear it in the way the wind speaks the syllables shorter now. Less brag in them. Work comes in on quiet feet. No one declares it. Your father rises and becomes three shapes in three motions, man. Pole, door, he eases the bar from its slots with a care that treats timber like a friend who has shared a burden. He leans the pole back into its corner, deferring the next sermon until the next storm. He opens the door only as much as the morning will allow. Snow scrapes its lip against the threshold and sulks in a white spill. Air follows clean, blunt, and unembarrassed. Smoke lifts with gratitude and the room's eyes stop stinging. The half-light is colorless and convincing. There is a stock-taking before there is a speech. A hand on the ridge post, dry, good. A glance at the bucket, 3 beads fell in the night, not 20. A scan of the thatch, where the broom taught the snow to slide, no sullen bulges, plotting rebellion. Your father's cough tries out its new morning voice and finds it less proud of itself. Your mother's hand, already moving, pauses, then sets the onion aside like a tool due a rest. The baby snuffles and chews on nothing in particular. The pig stands, shakes its straw mantle with the gravitas of a minor official, and announces that it will now be receiving the day. First fire, then water. The ember is coaxed to presence, not drama, a twist of kindling, a patient breath. A restrained addition of split wood storms are for bravado. Mornings are for craft. Flame catches with a sound like cloth finding its fold. The room's center grows warm, and warmth underwrites decisions. Your mother slides a pot over to the healthy part of the heat. There's the soft jolt of grain and scraps falling in. There will be a porridge before long that tastes like thrift and relief. You fill a pail for the well. The rope bites a familiar arc into your palm. The bucket's lip tells you the ice's thickness, with a single honest note when it breaks hard, then hollow. Clothes are where last night left them on your body. In winter you do not undress so much as rearrange. Wool cap back over ears. Cloak gathered up, so it does not drink the puddles the snow thinks are a good idea. You tuck a strip of fur under your belt for a promise to future hands. Everyone seems taller now that the quilt has lost its authority. The bedding, turned back, steams faintly in the hearth's breath. You shake it with your sister and laugh once, not because anything is funny, but because your lungs are not persuaded to be solemn. The straw smells tired. The hide smells loyal. The quilt smells like last night's choir. Before outside, there is inside animals. The hens take a census and announce it loudly to anyone interested. You return their argument with a handful of grain and the dignities that pass for conversation between species. The goat receives her tithe, hay reshaped into a heap that passes inspection. A hand under the jaw for courtesy, the pig presents its case in general terms and is satisfied by particulars, a turn of the bedding, a scratch where a rough beam has left a complaint, a pat that says you're an animal of consequence. Their warmth is visible in the air. It rises, clouds caught in the ember's low daylight. A rooster outside finds his office and dispatches darkness as if it were his personal jurisdiction. The sound cuts the morning like a knife shrugs fat from meat. Your mother crosses herself without fanaticism. Your father touches the doorpost with 2 knuckles where the burned circles sit. Those small sons that never ask to be thanked and are thanked anyway. St. Bridget's name finds the air with the esteem. St. Blazes finds the ash smudge on the beam above a chest that slept more than it coughed. Faith and physics share a bench in this house and seem to get along. The door opens wider and day walks in. It is far from noon. It is enough. You step to the threshold and the yard looks new built. White laid over everything like a clean sheet. No fold yet cut by carts. No insult yet offered by feet. Then you look closer and see the record the night left for the literate. Fox, written deftly along the hedge. Cat, making an essay of independence along the wall. Dog from the next place, whose feet report that it is not embarrassed by its errands. Perhaps a thin line farther off, parallel to the lane, too large for fox and too purposeful for dog. You make a note, and so does your father, and he says, easy. Not as a command, but as a translation of what you have just learned. What was near is not near now. Neighbors announce themselves the way mornings like to be certain they are shared. A cough from the next house where a child was not well fewer stitches in the sound. A clank far down the lane where someone tests a cartwheel against a freeze it did not ask for. A call, a name in greeting, not alarm. Your father answers with a word that means we are here, and then with a sentence that means later. Later is the first luxury of day. Night never allows it. Dawn manufactures it out of light and stubbornness. Inside, porridge finds its authority. It is not feast. It is kindness in spoon shape. You sit cross-legged and take your share from the side so the heat can live at the heart for those who come after. A drift of salt, if there is a drop of last summer's honey, it goes to the child whose cough was not reasonable 3 days ago. If there is a knob of bacon, it chooses your father with no one objecting. If there is neither, there is still steam and the knowledge that bowls will be washed because there was something to eat from them. Your mother keeps back a spoonful in the pot and sets it again to one side. Not forgetfulness, but the art of choosing how to be surprised later. Chores present themselves with their usual etiquette. Wood to be fetched from the stack, where you covered it with thatch scraps. Buckets to be set under the thatch's treacheries until a patch can be patched. Pegs to be replaced with fresh-cut hazel before the roof decides to test your character again. The bar's sockets to be checked and oiled with a finger dipped in fat, so the next storm will find you lavish with readiness. The broom must go up twice more. Down then, your father says to the ridge as if the house were a horse with an idea. It listens and sheds another slide of white with a soft, convincing now. There's a brief and honest inventory at the woodpile. Your father notes not stacks, but days, not chords, but chores to buy to make stacks possible again. His cough tries for bravado. He does not invite it to speak. Goose fat sits in a pot by the hearth with the smug look of a thing that did its job. The onion is retired to the trench where potato peels and straw leavings go to turn into next year's soil. The cloth that carried the steam and cough together is rinsed and wrung and set to dry near the line where smoke and air make a treaty. You wish for spring and do not apologize for it. Then you step back into the truth that wishing is not a chore. Boots are pulled on and thongs tightened. The door is left leaning but not latched. Day says, in and out will be frequent, and you listen. The children find brooms their size and make war on a drift. with the seriousness that would embarrass a cathedral procession. The goat, more honest than solemn, skirts the least dignified as snow and finds her usual place to consider the philosophy of hay. The pig returns to bed like a rich man to his office. You look once more at the room before work makes you forget to look. It is smaller than night made it, which is a kind of grace. There is space around each person's name again. The palate knows its next task: to rest, to air, to fold back over itself the way a field folds winter into spring in its own time. The quilt's red patch, faded as it is, shows itself in the new light like a deliberate sentence in a long story. The burned circles watch without spectacle. The ember, now fire, behaves as if called from sleep to work and pleased by it. Later, when the sky remembers blue and the village shakes the storm out of its sleeves, you will speak in the lane, you will compare drifts and pegs, and if anyone has news tracks near the boundary that were or were not wolves, there will be offers traded and refused politely and accepted happily, a scythe to borrow in a spring, a crock to return by Sunday, a hand later today to help set a pole where a roof learned a new sound it should not have. You will carry the night out of your bones by telling it in small parts until it becomes gossip, and then ordinary, and then a line in a season you survived. For now you eat, you feed, you check, you mend, you open, you thank. The day is not easier than the night. It is simply brighter about its difficulties. You kiss the baby's head because his breath smells like porridge and because you can. You hand your father the stick and he declines it with a gesture that would be pride in summer and is only gratitude now. You press your palm flat to the quilt in a habit you did not know your hand had learned. It is warm. It is enough. Outside, the rooster calls again, less urgently, as though working his way down a list of obligations he enjoys. From the woods, nothing answers you would not expect. The snow glows without malice. The house answers back to morning in a language you speak in your hands: wedge, pole, broom, bar, pot, spoon, breath. Winter is not finished with you, and you're not finished with winter, but the long night has been met with good timber, good company, and the plain inventions people pass to one another when the cold teaches its old lessons. You step into the day. Behind you the door leans in its frame, the bar ready for evening, the ember convinced of afternoon. You will do this again tonight and the next, and as many nights as the season asks, because you have learned how to make the difference between fear and weather, and to call that difference home